Chapter 776. He didn't know where Shi Muqing got his confidence from. It was as if everyone owed him something. The Shi family's matters had nothing to do with him. First, he killed Shi Lina and took the position of CEO of the company. Then, he killed Old Master Shi and obtained his shares. After that, he fell in love with Shi Sinan and hurt each other. Oh, in the end, he found out that he had been tricked by his adoptive father. The truth was not what his adoptive father had said, and he vowed to confess to Shi Sinan. Finally, there was a happy ending. Lunatic, go to hell. The next day, Ning Shu received a call from Shi Sinan's form teacher, saying that someone had come to visit Shi Sinan at school. It was a man. Ning Shu, he was really in a hurry to visit Shi Sinan early in the morning. Ning Shu said directly to the form teacher, no visits. Don't worry about him. No one can visit except me. The form teacher agreed and hesitated for a moment before saying, student Shi Sinan isn't used to school life. Shi Sinan stayed in school could be said to be outstanding. She was completely out of it. She didn't know how to fold her blanket and didn't know how to line up for food. In any case, she was just dumbfounded and looked like a retard. Ning Shu said indifferently, it's okay. She'll get used to it after a long time. Teacher, you don't have to be polite with her. Shi Muqing, who didn't see Shi Sinan, came back and threw the jacket in his hand heavily on the sofa. He looked at Ning Shu with a cold murderous gaze. Ning Shu smiled. Brother, why are you so angry early in the morning? It was hard for him to run to see Shi Sinan when his leg was injured. It would be strange if he saw her. Shi Muqing's lips curled into a cold smile. He was expressionless and no longer angry. He said in a mocking voice, I was bitten by a mad dog. Brother, you have to be careful. Mad dogs are poisonous, Ning Shu said with a smile. Shi Muqing walked over to Ning Shu with his long legs and looked down at Ning Shu. I see that your sister is also a martial artist. Why don't the two of us exchange pointers? Ning Shu shook his head. Little brother's leg is still injured. How can big sister bully him? Shi Muqing said carelessly, ignore it. I've suffered more serious injuries before. When my sister lived in a luxurious house, I had to fight with some hooligans just to get some food. Ning Shu, what does it have to do with me? What's wrong with living in a big house? Shi Muqing had a hard time when he was young. His cheap uncle beat and scolded him. If he didn't do well, he would beat him. Then, Shi Muqing transferred this resentment to the old man. Ha 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 ha, Ning Shu rolled up his sleeves and lightly said, little brother, you have to yield to this big sister. Shi Muqing coldly curled his lips and reached out to grab Ning Shu's shoulder. His long legs swept towards Ning Shu's lower body like the wind. His attack was very ruthless. Ning Shu grabbed Shi Muqing's hand that was on his shoulder and kicked Shi Muqing's leg that was sweeping towards him. It felt as if he had kicked an iron plate. Ning Shu's leg was numb from the shock. Ning Shu turned his body and wanted to throw Shi Muqing over his shoulder. However, Shi Muqing's body was very strong. Ning Shu couldn't carry him over his shoulder for the first time. Shi Muqing smiled coldly and moved closer to Ning Shu's ear. He whispered, big sister, is this taking the initiative to crawl into little brother's arms? Ning Shu's ears twitched. Shi Muqing's hot breath blew into his ear. Ning Shu had goosebumps all over his body and his hair stood on end. So disgusting. Ning Shu mobilized the strength in his body and used all his strength to heavily throw Shi Muqing to the ground. Shi Muqing smashed onto the ground with a bang. Shi Muqing groaned. Just as he was about to get up, Ning Shu stepped on his chest and crushed it with all his strength. Shi Muqing felt that this woman's leg was like a huge rock pressing down on his chest. His heart couldn't take it anymore and was beating very fast. Ning Shu smiled. Little brother, why are you really letting big sister do it? Shi Mucheng, on the other hand, was lying on the ground with a comfortable expression. He rested his head on his palm and said indifferently, "It's very comfortable to be under big sister's feet." "Is that so?" Ning Shu smiled and used all his strength to crush his chest. Shi Mucheng groaned and his face was a little pale. "Is it comfortable?" Ning Shu asked. Shi Mucheng reached out and grabbed Ning Shu's ankle. His thumb scratched the skin of Ning Shu's ankle. Ning Shu said, "Big sister's ankle is very beautiful." Shi Mucheng said as he put his hand to the tip of his nose and took a deep breath. "It's very fragrant." Shi Mucheng looked at Ning Shu and smiled evilly. Ning Shu didn't get angry and said indifferently, "Is that so?" "It's very fragrant." Shi Mucheng took another breath and seemed to be savoring the aftertaste. Ning Shu said indifferently, "I didn't wash my feet." Ignoring Shi Mucheng's somewhat stunned expression, he raised his foot and stepped on Shi Mucheng's face, crushing it with all his strength. Shi Mucheng grabbed Ning Shu's ankle and used all his strength. Ning Shu fell to the ground. Shi Mucheng turned over and pressed down on Ning Shu. Ning Shu kicked Shi Mucheng away and kicked him a short distance away. Shi Mucheng covered his chest and coughed, wiping the blood from his nose that was stepped on by Ning Shu. Shi Mucheng looked at Ning Shu and actually laughed. "I didn't expect Big Sister to be so powerful." Thanks for letting me win, little brother," Ning Shu said with a smile. Ning Shu picked up his bag and left the villa to go to work. Shi Mucheng wiped the blood on his lips with his thumb and looked coldly at Ning Shu's back. Ning Shu left the villa. As soon as he got into the car, he immediately rubbed his ankle with a grimace. The ankle that was pinched by Shi Mucheng had turned a little purple. The day before Shi Sinan's 18th birthday, Ning Shu went to school to pick Shi Sinan up to attend the banquet. When Ning Shu saw Shi Sinan, he was a little surprised because the current Shi Sinan was a little different from the previous Pifumai. The current Shi Sinan's skin was a little darker than before. It was probably because she didn't have any natural cosmetics to maintain her skin, which made her skin a little rougher. She was a lot more haggard and was a little different from the sweet and obedient girl from before. So a fair complexion covered up three ugly things. When Shi Sinan saw Ning Shu, tears fell down her face. She looked at Ning Shu and didn't speak for a long time. Ning Shu said to Shi Sinan, "Get in the car." Shi Sinan wiped her tears and got into the car. She looked at Ning Shu and said in a sobbing voice, "Mom, what did I do wrong? Why are you doing this to me?" Ning Shu raised his eyebrows. "What did I do to you? You said you wanted to go to university, so I transferred you to this kind of school. You'll be in school for a month, and no one will disturb your studies," Ning Shu said with a cold expression. "But this school is really bad, Shi Sinan said while crying. She had to run every day, and she had to wash clothes. She had never washed clothes before. In the morning, when she was still asleep, she was woken up by the noisy whistle and had to fold her own quilt. She folded it neatly, and it was as angular as a piece of tofu. If she didn't fold it well, the teacher would make someone fold it until it was done." Chapter 777. Anyway, this school made Shi Sinan feel at a loss. The pace was so fast that she had to do something at one point and then what to do at the next point. Shi Sinan had no way to adapt to such a life at all. She didn't have a closet of clothes for her to change into, and the school only gave her 3 sets of uniforms. Shi Sinan didn't know how to wash clothes. The clothes were soaked in the water and then hung on the drying rack wet. She didn't even know how to twist them. The food wasn't as delicious as the food at home, which made Shi Sinan very uncomfortable. Once, Shi Sinan even ate a green worm. This made Shi Sinan lose her appetite for the whole day. Shi Sinan almost lived with tears in her eyes. She just wanted her family to quickly come and take her away. Her phone was confiscated, and she couldn't contact her family. Sinan felt that she had fallen from one world to another. "Mom, I don't want to go to that school," Sinan pleaded with Ning Shu. "It's okay. You're about to take your exams. When you enter university, you'll leave that school," Ning Shu said indifferently. Sinan was about to break down. Ning Shu shouted sharply, "Mom, you weren't like this before. Mom, you don't love me anymore." Ning Shu smiled very gently. "Of course I do. Why wouldn't I love you? But why did you send me to such a school? Mom, I want to go back to my previous school. Please, I will listen to you in the future," Ning Shu pleaded. Ning Shu reached out to touch Sinan's head and said, "Good girl, be good." Sinan seemed to be frightened. Her body convulsed, and she cried silently. As soon as she got home, Sinan rushed into the house, ready to find her grandfather and beg him not to let her go to the military management school. Sinan had just rushed into the living room when she saw Shimuching sitting on the sofa. For some reason, Sinan immediately covered her face, not wanting Shimuching to see her in such a sorry state. When Shimuching saw Sinan, he stood up and walked towards her. But after taking 2 steps, he stopped. He glanced at Sinan and said, "Why didn't you say hello when you saw your uncle?" Sinan lowered her head and called out softly, "Uncle." Shimuching looked at Sinan's body, which made Sinan's face a little hot. Shimuching said, "Yes, you've lost a lot of weight." When Sinan heard this, she felt a lump in her throat and almost cried. Ning Shu drove the car to the garage. When he reached the living room, he saw Sinan and Shimuching standing opposite each other. There was an inexplicable atmosphere between them. Ning Shu walked over and held Sinan's hand. "Go upstairs and take a shower. Your grandfather will be back later." Sinan kept her head down as she followed Ning Shu upstairs. She felt that her uncle's gaze was fixed on her. Sinan's heart warmed. At least her uncle cared about her. He didn't want her mother to be so cold and heartless. Sinan took a shower and took out an exquisite and beautiful dress from the wardrobe. She looked at herself in the mirror and realized that her face didn't match the dress. She used to look beautiful in it, but her skin was a little tanned at school, so she didn't look the same in the dress. Sinan bit her lip tightly, picked up the makeup on the dressing table, and put a layer of powder on her face and neck. Only then did she look much better. Ning Shu was waiting for Sinan outside the room. When Sinan came out, Ning Shu saw that Sinan had paled several shades. Did she put on makeup? Sinan felt a little uncomfortable under Ning Shu's stare. She called out, "Mom." "Yes, your grandfather is back," Ning Shu said. Sinan immediately held onto the handrail and ran downstairs. Ning Shu heard Sinan whining to Old Master from upstairs. Anyway, she didn't want to go to that unlucky school anymore. It was simply a disaster. Old Master had previously rejected Ning Shu's request to not let the child go abroad, so he couldn't object again. Old Master smiled at Sinan and told her that her mother was doing it for her own good. Sinan was stunned. She wanted to cry, but when she thought of the makeup on her face, she forced herself to hold back her tears. Seeing Sinan like this, Old Master said, "See, Sinan has become much stronger after going to such a school." Ning Shu, ha 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 ha, Shimuching said casually, "Sinan is the eldest daughter of the Shi family. She doesn't need to go to such a school to waste her time. There are some things that she doesn't need to do personally. It's simply a waste of time. If she has the time to wash clothes, she might as well learn something useful and create more value. Sinan doesn't have the life of washing clothes or folding blankets." Sinan was very touched to see Shimuching speak up for her. She whispered to Shimuching, "Thank you, uncle." Shimuching smiled. His eyes met with Ning Shu, who was standing on the stairs. The corners of his mouth curled up into a mocking and contemptuous smile. He looked at Ning Shu, but said to Shi Sinan, I'm your uncle. It's only right for me to dote on you. Ning Shu's expression was cold, and he ignored Shi Muqing's mockery and provocation. Old Master said, don't think too much. Tomorrow is your birthday party. You have to be beautiful and happy. Shi Sinan acted coquettishly for a long time, but her grandfather didn't feel comfortable, which made her very depressed. After dinner, Ning Shu said to Shi Sinan, sleep with me tonight. Ning Shu was afraid that something would happen at night. Shi Muqing's beastly nature would be unleashed. After midnight, Shi Sinan would be 18 years old. Shi Sinan was angry that her mother treated her so coldly. She said, I'll sleep by myself. I'm not a child anymore. Didn't you say that I need to be independent? She had a glib tongue. But in front of Shi Muqing, it was as if she had cut her tongue. Ning Shu didn't say anything. He went back to his room, set up a spirit-gathering array, and cultivated for a while. At about 10 o'clock, Ning Shu took the key and opened Shi Sinan's room. He planned to stay in Shi Sinan's room tonight. As soon as Ning Shu opened the door, he saw Shi Muqing sitting by the bed and Shi Sinan sitting on the bed. When Shi Sinan saw Ning Shu, he immediately called out in a panic, Mom. Shi Muqing turned his head. When he saw Ning Shu, the corners of Ning Shu's mouth curled up, looking fearless. Ning Shu was furious. He clenched his fist and was about to hit Shi Muqing's face. Shi Muqing quickly grabbed Ning Shu's fist and curled the corners of his mouth. I've been tricked once. Don't you think I'll be on guard? Ning Shu sneered. What are you doing in Sinan's room in the middle of the night? Shi Muqing sneered. Do you think, ouch, before Shi Muqing could finish speaking, he felt a sharp pain in his lower body. He looked down and saw a foot on his manhood. The man's weak spot was hit hard, and Shi Muqing immediately bent over in pain. Ning Shu withdrew his fist from Shi Muqing's hand. He didn't have hands, but he had feet. Uncle. Shi Sinan looked at Shi Muqing worriedly. Chapter 778. Ning Shu looked at Shi Muqing, who was leaning against the wall with his legs between his legs. Murderous intent rose in his heart, and he decided to kill him directly. Shi Muqing was in so much pain that cold sweat rolled down his forehead. He looked at Ning Shu with bloodshot eyes, and the atmosphere was stagnant. Shi Sinan hurriedly got out of bed and stood in front of Ning Shu, holding up an exquisitely wrapped box. Mom. Shi Sinan said to Ning Shu, Uncle is here to give me a birthday present. Ning Shu pushed Shi Sinan away and said coldly, Can't the birthday present be given at the banquet tomorrow? Uncle said that he would give me a special surprise, Shi Sinan said quickly. Uncle said that there is a present now, and there will be a present tomorrow. Shut up, I didn't ask you. Ning Shu scolded, he came to your room in the middle of the night to give you something. He is your uncle. In ancient times, even biological siblings had to be careful and wouldn't easily enter a woman's boudoir. He is just your uncle. Shi Sinan was stunned by Ning Shu's scolding, and then she said, What era is this? Even if the era had changed, the difference between men and women still existed. Moreover, Shi Muqing had unfathomable feelings for Shi Sinan. Could it be that Shi Sinan, as a woman, didn't have any strange feelings? She should still have some feelings about whether he treated her as a junior or a woman. Ning Shu took a deep breath and felt that his lungs were about to explode. If it weren't for the fact that Shi Sinan was the star of the banquet tomorrow, Ning Shu really wanted to slap her into a pig's head. Fortunately, she wasn't his daughter. Ning Shu ignored Shi Muqing, whose face had darkened, and took Shi Sinan's hand to the old man's bedroom. Ning Shu knocked on the old man's door. The old man had already fallen asleep. He opened the door in a daze and saw Ning Shu's angry face. Shi Sinan looked uneasy and asked, What's the matter? Dad, what does Shi Muqing mean by going to Sinan's room in the middle of the night? What does he want to do? Ning Shu said, you'd better investigate this Shimucheng. Grandpa, uncle came to my room to give me a birthday present, said Shi Sinan. The old man smiled. It's just a gift. I'll talk to him tomorrow and tell him to be careful. Dad. Ning Shu frowned. Go to sleep, the old man said. You're old. You can't stay up late. The old man closed the door as he spoke. Ning Shu let out a long sigh. He pulled Shi Sinan to his bedroom and said to her, sleep here. Shi Sinan held the gift from Shimucheng tightly in her hand. She hadn't opened the gift yet, so she didn't know what was inside. Seeing that Ning Shu was about to leave, Shi Sinan hurriedly asked, Mom, where are you going? To see your uncle, Ning Shu said. Shi Sinan immediately said, Mom, there's nothing between uncle and me. Mom, don't fight with uncle anymore. By the time something happened, it would be too late. Ning Shu wanted to directly cripple Shimucheng, but Shimucheng was a gangster and was very vigilant. He had used tricks to make Shimucheng suffer twice. Ning Shu looked at Shi Sinan, who was holding him, and pushed her hand away. When he opened the door, Shi Sinan's voice came from behind. Mom, you're so scary now. No wonder Dad left us. Why don't you believe me? Ning Shu paused. She was scary. Ning Shu suddenly wanted to laugh. The scary one was Shimucheng, who was full of hatred and wanted to kill the Shi family. In Shi Sinan's world, as long as someone didn't listen to her and didn't treat her well, she was scary. Why was she still so loyal to Shimucheng when he treated her so badly? Ning Shu smiled slightly. I'm that scary. When Ning Shu arrived at Shi Sinan's room, Shimucheng was no longer inside. Ning Shu heard the sound of the engine outside and saw Shimucheng driving away from the villa from the window. Back in the bedroom, Ning Shu saw that Shi Sinan was still awake, holding the gift from Shimucheng in her hand. Go to sleep. It's getting late. Get some rest, Ning Shu said to Shi Sinan. Shi Sinan lay down uneasily and looked at Ning Shu, who was sleeping next to her. She pursed her lips and said, Mom, Ning Shu turned his head and said calmly, go to sleep. Perform well tomorrow. Seeing such a calm Ning Shu, Shi Sinan felt even more uneasy and stopped talking to Ning Shu. Shi Sinan turned her body so that her back was facing Ning Shu. She secretly opened the gift. Inside the box was a necklace. It was very exquisite, and the pendant was a pink gem. Shi Sinan held the necklace in the palm of her hand and smiled slightly. This was the first birthday gift she had received on her 18th birthday. The next day, the villa was busy setting up the banquet in the evening. The villa's living room was large enough to hold a banquet. There were piles of champagne towers and all kinds of delicious food. Waiters in tuxedos were shuttling back and forth. After Shimucheng drove away last night, he didn't come back until the banquet was about to start. The designer was styling Shi Sinan. Ning Shu pushed the door open and walked in. When he saw Shi Sinan, who was beautifully dressed, he smiled and said, Sinan, you're very beautiful. Happy birthday. Thank you, Mom. Ning Shu saw a necklace around Shi Sinan's neck and asked, did the designer match this for you? Shi Sinan quickly shook her head and said, no, I thought this necklace was very beautiful, so I put it on. Ning Shu stared at the necklace. This should have been given to Shi Sinan by Shimucheng. Seeing Ning Shu staring at the necklace, Shi Sinan couldn't help but press her hand on the necklace and change the subject. Mom, I'm a little nervous. It's okay. I'll go down with you later. Ning Shu comforted her. The guests who came to attend the banquet came one after another. When the guests arrived, Old Master Shi said a few words of thanks. Amidst the applause, Ning Shu slowly walked down the stairs with Shi Sinan. Shi Sinan was a little nervous. Ning Shu patted her hand and said, it's okay. Ning Shu took Shi Sinan to meet the elders. In the face of unfamiliar people, Shi Sinan was a little reserved. She addressed Ning Shu as he asked her to and didn't say a word more. She seemed absent-minded. Shi Sinan scanned the entire banquet hall from time to time, but didn't see her uncle. She was a little disappointed. What happened last night must have made her uncle angry. Shi Sinan touched the necklace around her neck, hoping that her uncle would attend the banquet. In Shi Sinan's heart, Shi Mucheng was the missing fatherly love in her life. Although it sometimes felt strange and her heart would beat faster in the face of her handsome uncle. Her heart was indeed full of joy for this uncle who had suddenly arrived. Ning Shu also looked around, but didn't see Shi Mucheng. Where the hell did he go? Just as Ning Shu was looking for Shi Mucheng's voice, all the lights in the banquet hall suddenly went out, causing a commotion. Ning Shu reflexively grabbed Shi Sinan's arm tightly and said loudly, "Don't worry, everyone. It's just a trip. It'll be fine soon." Chapter 779. The power suddenly went out, and the bright environment suddenly turned dark. It was so dark that one couldn't even see their fingers. Ning Shu grabbed Shi Sinan's arm tightly and waited for the lights to come on. Many people took out their phones, which lit up the banquet hall. Ning Shu vaguely saw someone walking straight towards Shi Sinan. It looked like Shi Mucheng. Shi Mucheng whispered something in Shi Sinan's ear and left. Without the light, Ning Shu couldn't see Shi Mucheng's and Shi Sinan's expressions clearly, nor could he hear what Shi Mucheng said to Sinan. Shi Mucheng left after saying a few words to Shi Sinan. After Shi Mucheng left, Shi Sinan said to Ning Shu, "Mom, I'm going to the bathroom." "Wait a minute. Wait for the electricity to come." Ning Shu was still holding Shi Sinan's arm tightly. "What did your uncle say to you just now?" Ning Shu asked. "No, nothing." Shi Sinan stammered. Ning Shu asked suspiciously, "Is it really nothing? I'm your mother. You can tell me anything." "That's right. Uncle prepared a birthday surprise for me and asked me to go out," Shi Sinan said. Ning Shu's face hardened, and he tightened his grip on Shi Sinan and said, "You're the star of the banquet. How can you suddenly run away? When the banquet is over, I'll go with you. It's not safe for you to go out so late." Getting close to Shi Mucheng was simply courting death, meat delivered to his doorstep. This. Shi Sinan was a little hesitant. Her uncle had asked her to go alone, saying that it was a birthday surprise specially prepared for her. "The electricity will be here soon." Ning Shu said, "This birthday banquet is held for you. You have to stay at least until the end of the banquet. As a rich young lady, can't you even tolerate this?" Shi Sinan wanted to leave more and more. It was such a boring banquet, and her uncle must still be waiting for her outside the house. Shi Sinan suddenly pulled Ning Shu's hand away and said, "Mom, I'll be back soon." After saying that, Shi Sinan disappeared in a puff of smoke. Without any light, Ning Shu couldn't find Shi Sinan. Ning Shu was speechless. Ning Shu lifted her skirt and ran out of the banquet hall. She saw a car drive away. Ning Shu looked at the disappearing taillights and sneered. The plot was irreversible. No, what was irreversible was not the plot, but the human heart. That handsome uncle of his was always right. "You're so handsome, everything you say is right." Ning Shu turned around and returned to the banquet hall. The banquet hall suddenly became bright as the electricity came. Ning Shu walked over to his father, who was talking to someone else, and said, "Dad, I have something to tell you." Grandpa Sheng followed Ning Shu to the side and asked, "What's wrong?" "Sinan is gone." Ning Shu looked at Grandpa Sheng. "She ran away with Shi Mucheng." "Dad, I don't know why you indulge Shi Mucheng so much, but his existence makes me feel like there's a fishbone in my throat," Ning Shu said directly. Grandpa Sheng was wearing a tang suit. With his hands behind his back, he frowned and asked, "Where did they go?" "I don't know." Ning Shu had completely given up on Shi Sinan and would never care about her again. Grandpa Sheng said, "I'll call Shi Mucheng." Grandpa Sheng called Shi Mucheng, but it didn't go through. Grandpa Sheng looked a little serious and said, "It's okay. They'll be back soon." Ning Shu was very dissatisfied with Grandpa Sheng's protection of Shi Mucheng. She said, "Dad, why are you so good to Shi Mucheng? He doesn't have the blood of the Shi family in him at all." Grandpa Sheng looked at Ning Shu. "Lena, you've lost your cool. Ning Shu, if you knew that the son in your household register was going to sleep with your granddaughter, you wouldn't be so calm." "Dad, Shi Mucheng isn't Uncle's son. Otherwise, why isn't his surname Shi?" Ning Shu asked. "Have you investigated it clearly?" "Shi Mucheng followed his mother's surname," Grandpa Sheng said. Ning Shu held her forehead and couldn't help but shake her head. "Dad, you're really old and muddle-headed." Ning Shu frowned. Grandpa Sheng was a business figure. How could he do such a stupid thing? Back then, Uncle had stolen the company's money and couldn't hold on without money. It was Grandpa Sheng who thought of a way to save the company. A person like Grandpa Sheng could only become more shrewd as he lived and cultivate into an old fox. Was it really because he felt guilty that he was so good to his son who had stolen the company's money? Or did Grandpa Sheng need Shi Mucheng for something? Or was it because of Shi Mucheng? He felt that things were a little complicated. Grandpa Sheng was killed by Shi Mucheng in the end, but he didn't know the details. Ning Shu looked at Grandpa Sheng and finally shook his head. No matter what Grandpa Sheng's plan was, Shi Mucheng had to die. Shi Mucheng was a bloodthirsty wolf. If he couldn't be tamed, beating him to death was the safest. Otherwise, he would be harmed instead. Ning Shu couldn't be bothered to think about Shi Sinan's matter and talked to his business partners. Many people asked about Shi Sinan, probably because they wanted to become in-laws with the Shi family. Ning Shu just smiled and said that Shi Sinan was still young and had to go to university. She didn't have such plans in the next few years. For a daughter like Shi Sinan to marry into another family, it wasn't a marriage, but a feud. Shi Sinan, who was innocent, pure, beautiful, and unpretentious, wouldn't socialize with others like a rich man's wife. Ning Shu didn't intend to introduce Shi Sinan to her in-laws. Since she liked her uncle, then they should be together and never be separated in this lifetime. The banquet was still going on here, while Shi Sinan sat in Shi Mucheng's convertible car. The evening breeze blowing on her body was very comfortable. Shi Sinan couldn't help but raise her hand and say with a smile on her face, "It's so comfortable to come out. The banquet is suffocating." Shi Mucheng looked at Shi Sinan. Shi Sinan put down her hand a little embarrassedly and said with anticipation in her voice, "Uncle, what birthday present did you prepare for me?" Shi Mucheng had a wicked smile on his face, and his deep eyes were bright like the bright stars in the night. Shi Sinan looked at Shi Mucheng and was stunned. She felt that everything around her had disappeared, and only Shi Mucheng's face was in her eyes. "Silly." Shi Mucheng bent his finger and gently flicked Shi Sinan's forehead. After being touched by Shi Mucheng, Shi Sinan's face turned red. Her whole body was hot, and there was a faint sweetness in her heart. Shi Mucheng saw the affection in Shi Sinan's eyes, and the corners of his mouth curled up. Shi Mucheng took Shi Sinan to the hotel. Shi Sinan looked at him blankly and asked, "Uncle, why did you bring me here?" Shi Mucheng actually took Shi Sinan's hand. Shi Sinan suddenly looked as if she had been startled. She wanted to withdraw her hand, but Shi Mucheng held it tightly. Shi Sinan's mind was in a mess, and she murmured, "Uncle. Uncle. The hotel is very big. I won't get lost holding on to you." Shi Mucheng smiled meaningfully. Chapter 780. Shi Sinan let Shi Mucheng hold her hand as they entered the hotel. Shi Mucheng pushed open the door of the suite. It was a presidential suite, but the interior was decorated like a dream. Shi Sinan was amazed, as if she had entered a castle. Shi Sinan walked into the room and said to Shi Muqing in surprise, "Thank you, uncle. I like it very much." Shi Muqing took out a shiny crown from behind him and put it on Shi Sinan's head. The diamond shone brightly under the light. "In my heart, you are a princess waiting to be rescued in the castle." Shi Muqing's low and magnetic voice had a fatal attraction in such an environment. Shi Sinan's face flushed red. She touched the diamond crown on her head with a bright and sweet smile on her face. "Thank you, uncle." Shi Muqing looked at Shi Sinan's smile, and his eyes deepened. He kissed Shi Sinan's forehead. Shi Sinan was a little stunned. She took 2 steps back in shock, but fell onto the sofa. Shi Muqing's lips curled into a doting smile. He supported himself on the sofa and pressed Shi Sinan under him. "Why are you so careless?" Shi Sinan's heart was beating like thunder. The uneasiness in her heart made her tremble slightly in fear. Her woman's intuition told her that what happened next would be beyond her imagination. Shi Sinan put her hands on Shi Muqing's chest and tried to push him away, but she couldn't. Shi Muqing held Shi Sinan's hand and lowered his head to kiss her lips. It was very sweet. Shi Muqing held the back of Shi Sinan's head and plundered her sweetness. Shi Sinan's mind was blank. She didn't know anything and was in a daze. The electric current on her lips spread to every corner of her body, making her body extremely weak. It was as if her soul had left her body. Shi Muqing let go of Shi Sinan. When he saw Shi Sinan's appearance, he chuckled softly and picked up the dazed Shi Sinan. Shi Sinan immediately reacted and struggled, but Shi Muqing held her tightly and she couldn't break free. "Niece, uncle will make you very happy." Shi Muqing's voice was bewitching, like a demon tempting the world. No, the next day, the sun shone into the hotel room. There were messy clothes on the floor, and the 2 of them slept in each other's arms. Shi Sinan's eyelashes trembled as she opened her eyes. When she saw her uncle's exquisite and handsome face, Shi Sinan hurriedly sat up, but the blanket slipped off. Shi Sinan hurriedly wrapped the blanket around her chest. Shi Muqing woke up in a daze. When he opened his eyes and saw Shi Sinan, he abruptly turned over and pinned her down. "Uncle, you can't." Shi Sinan was about to cry. She actually had such a relationship with her uncle. Shi Muqing said with an evil smile, "Why not?" No. Shi Sinan hurriedly shook her head. "You're my uncle and my mother's younger brother. Little brother, my little brother is in your body." Shi Muqing laughed softly. Shi Muqing kissed Shi Sinan. Shi Sinan resisted, but her eyes were a little dazed. It was as if all the strength in her body had been sucked out by Shi Muqing. After Shi Muqing kissed her, he said with an evil smile, "Your mouth says no, but your body is very honest." Shi Sinan felt embarrassed and uncomfortable. She begged Shi Muqing, "Uncle, don't tell Grandpa and Mom about this. I beg you." Shi Muqing's eyes deepened, and he said in a hoarse voice, "I like it when you call me uncle under me. If you don't want me to tell my family, you have to listen to me obediently in the future," Shi Muqing said evilly as his eyes scanned Shi Sinan's body. Shi Sinan couldn't help but cross her arms to cover her chest. She nodded repeatedly. "I'll definitely listen to you, uncle. Don't tell anyone else, uncle. Good girl." Shi Muqing smiled wickedly. When Shi Muqing and Shi Sinan returned to the villa, Ning Shu was having breakfast. Ning Shu just glanced at the 2 of them indifferently and continued to eat his sandwich. Seeing Shi Sinan's bright and alluring appearance, Ning Shu could guess what had happened. In the end, the 2 of them were still together. Shi Sinan's character was like this. It seemed that she was born for Shi Muqing. No matter how much she tried to stop her, she couldn't stop Shi Sinan's heart from pouncing on Shi Muqing. Ning Shu had thought that since Shi Sinan was the daughter of the original owner of the body, he shouldn't let her and Shi Muqing get together. Especially after the physical and psychological abuse, Shi Sinan was also quite miserable. But now it seemed that there was no need. Even her own mother had given up. One could imagine how blind Shi Sinan was. Ning Shu didn't care about Shi Sinan now. She was an enemy of the same class as Shi Muqing, so he wouldn't care about her anymore. When Shi Sinan faced her mother, she felt guilty. She was afraid that Ning Shu would ask her where she had gone yesterday and what had happened. Shi Sinan walked slowly to Ning Shu and called out carefully, "Mom." Ning Shu grunted. "Let's eat. I'll take you to school after eating." When Shi Sinan heard that Ning Shu was going to send her to that military-style management school, her face instantly darkened. She hurriedly looked at Shi Muqing. After what had happened between her and Shi Muqing, she subconsciously regarded Shi Muqing as the closest person to her. Shi Muqing said coldly, "Sinan is the eldest daughter of the Shi family. How can she go to that kind of third-rate school?" "I don't agree." Ning Shu's face was cold. "Whether you agree or not has nothing to do with me. What right do you have to object? My relationship with her." Before Shi Muqing could finish speaking, Shi Sinan interrupted him. "He's my uncle, just my uncle." Shi Muqing glanced at the flustered Shi Sinan and sneered. Shi Sinan was very afraid that Shi Muqing would say what had happened between them. She hurriedly changed the topic and looked at Ning Shu pleadingly. "Mom, don't send me to that kind of school again. Please. You really don't want to go?" Ning Shu asked indifferently. Shi Sinan hurriedly nodded. "Mom, I really don't want to go." "Up to you." Ning Shu wouldn't care about Shi Sinan anymore. Shi Sinan didn't expect Ning Shu to agree so easily. She was stunned for a moment, then she smiled. "Thank you, Mom." As Shi Sinan spoke, she hugged Ning Shu. "Mom, thank you. I love you. What's that smell on you?" Ning Shu pushed Shi Sinan away unceremoniously. Shi Sinan was still a little upset that her mother had pushed her away. She couldn't help but smell her own clothes. She had already showered. How could there still be a smell? Ning Shu finished the milk in her cup, took her bag, and went to work. Seeing Ning Shu leave just like that, Shi Sinan called out, "Mom, is there anything else?" Ning Shu turned to look at Shi Sinan. Faced with Ning Shu's indifferent gaze, Shi Sinan felt uncomfortable all over. Her mother's reaction was really too abnormal. Chapter 781. Shi Sinan didn't want her mother to question her about where she had been last night, what she had done, and why she hadn't returned home all night. On the way back, Shi Sinan racked her brains for an explanation, but the other party didn't ask her a single question. This made Shi Sinan even more uneasy. "Mom, can I really not go to that school?" Shi Sinan felt that it was too sudden and too easy, which made Shi Sinan feel unreal. God knew how much she hated and feared that school. Sometimes, when she was thirsty in the middle of the night, the dormitory was dark, and she didn't even dare to get up to drink water. The dormitory was so small, but there were several people living together. Shi Sinan felt that the dormitory was always filled with a strange smell. Ning Shu looked at Shi Sinan. "As long as you're happy." Ning Shu then turned around and left the villa, driving to the detective office. The private investigator gave Ning Shu a video, which was a little blurry and shaky. Obviously, it had been secretly taken with a cell phone. In the video, some guests were buying drugs. Ning Shu took out his computer from his bag, connected it to his cell phone with a data cable, and copied the video to the computer. After copying it, Ning Shu asked the private investigator, "Where did this video come from?" "A waiter in the club secretly took it and paid 2 billion yuan. The private investigator spread his hands. If someone found out, he would be dead. If it weren't for the waiter's family situation, he wouldn't have done such a risky thing. Ning Shu said indifferently, money is not a problem. Does this kind of transaction happen every day? The club provides this thing, but only to members. It won't provide it to new guests, the private investigator said. Can the waiter have access to it? Ning Shu asked. The private investigator shook his head. Usually, the waiter can't have access to it. This kind of thing is sent by a professional. Ning Shu returned the cell phone to the private investigator and paid him. After leaving the detective office, Ning Shu wiped the fingerprints on the USB flash drive with tissue paper, put it in a bag, and stuffed it into a box, ready to send it to the police station. After that, Ning Shu called the police through a public phone. She shouted in panic, "Hello, I want to call the police. I'm a female employee of Xianqing Clubhouse. This clubhouse forced me to prostitute myself. If I don't agree, they will kill me. I also took a picture of them selling drugs. The evidence has been sent to your police station." Ning Shu's voice trembled. He was obviously very scared. At the mention of poison, the policeman on the other end of the phone immediately said, "Where are you? Don't be afraid. We'll come and find you." "No, no, they will kill me." Ning Shu hung up the phone. After doing these things, Ning Shu went to the Chinese medicine shop to have a look and prepared to buy some medicine. Even if he didn't poison them to death, he wouldn't let Shi Muqing and Shi Sinan have an easy time. Of course, they wouldn't use arsenic directly. Modern methods could detect that arsenic was arsenic. Ning Shu strolled around the Chinese medicine store, but there was nothing good. Immortal medicine still needed to be matched with immortal herbs. Similarly, poisons also needed to be matched with top-grade poisons. Moreover, these Chinese medicines were basically artificially grown, so they couldn't be compared to wild ones. Ning Shu looked at these medicinal herbs and thought about the poison formula in his heart. However, the configuration of these herbs was too low and couldn't achieve the effect of the poison formula. In the end, Ning Shu chose a rather wretched prescription, which was to split up. Ning Shu bought greenwood incense, musk, sulfur, and other raw materials. "I'll let you know what sex is and what true love is." Ning Shu stuffed the things into his bag and took them to the company to get them done. On the other side, Ning Shu agreed that Shi Sinan wouldn't go to the militarized school, so Shi Muqing took Sinan to the school to get the things and moved her student status back to the original school. Shi Sinan's homeroom teacher called Ning Shu to ask about it. Ning Shu received the call from the homeroom teacher, rolled his eyes, and said indifferently, "Let them be." He hung up the phone and then ground the medicine into powder. After all the ingredients had been ground into powder, there was only one thing left, Shi Sinan and Shi Muqing's hair. There was a hint of magic in this formula. After work in the evening, Ning Shu returned to the villa. Seeing that there was no one in the living room, he prepared to go to Shi Sinan's room to look for Shi Sinan's hair. Ning Shu grabbed the doorknob and turned it. The door was locked from the inside. He vaguely heard someone talking inside, but Ning Shu still couldn't hear anything. Ning Shu simply lay on the ground and listened through the gap below. This time, he could hear much more clearly, "But, uncle, you really can't, you annoying little vixen. Do you know that you're playing with fire? Don't move. If you move again, I can't guarantee what will happen. You started the fire yourself. You have to put it out yourself. Uncle, Ning Shu. Degree. What the fuck?" Ning Shu felt goosebumps all over her body when she suddenly heard so many authentic quotes from the president. What kind of filthy scene was inside? Ning Shu felt like 10 bottles of chili sauce had been poured into his eyes and ears, and it was the kind that was insanely spicy. Ning Shu kicked the door, and Shi Sinan immediately pushed Shi Muqing away in a panic. Shi Sinan asked nervously, "Who is it?" "It's me." "Open the door," Ning Shu shouted. Shi Sinan's face turned pale, and she whispered to Shi Muqing, "Uncle, my mother is here. Can you hide?" Shi Muqing pursed his lips and stood still. Shi Sinan pushed Shi Muqing into the bathroom. Please hide. If my mother knows that you're in my room, you'll quarrel again. Shi Sinan was so anxious that her face turned red. Shi Muqing looked down at Shi Sinan's red lips. His eyes darkened as he said, "Are you so afraid that I'll get hurt?" In the face of her uncle's straightforward question, Shi Sinan blushed and denied it. "I'm worried that my mother will be angry. I'm not worried that you'll get hurt." Shi Muqing stood still, and no matter how Shi Sinan pushed him, he wouldn't budge. "I'm not hiding. Why should I hide?" Shi Muqing said indifferently. Shi Sinan was so anxious that she didn't know what to do. Her mother kept knocking on the door, and her uncle refused to hide. "Uncle, please. I'm worried that you'll get hurt. Quickly hide. If my mother finds out about our relationship, she'll kill me," Shi Sinan said anxiously to Shi Muqing. Shi Muqing said coldly, "She won't dare to do anything to you. No one dares to touch my people. I'll protect you." "Yes, uncle will protect me." Shi Sinan pushed Shi Muqing into the bathroom and closed the door. She tidied up her clothes and took a deep breath before opening the door. Shi Sinan opened the door and saw Ning Shu's cold face. Shi Sinan's heart trembled. She felt that her mother had become someone she didn't recognize. She didn't have the warmth she used to have. Ning Shu walked into the room and looked around. Seeing Shi Sinan's long hair on the pillow, Ning Shu twirled it. Shi Sinan looked at Ning Shu in surprise. "Mother, what are you doing?" "Nothing." "Where's the other person?" Ning Shu asked. "I heard two people talking in the room." Chapter 782. Ning Shu looked around Shi Sinan's house and walked towards the bathroom. Shi Sinan immediately stood in front of Ning Shu, shook her head, and said, "Mom, there's no one else in the house. I'm the only one here." "I heard a man's voice," Ning Shu said lightly. Shi Sinan immediately shook her head. "No one. I'm the one on the phone." Her phone had already been confiscated, okay? How could there be a phone to make a call? "I'm just taking a look." Ning Shu reached out and pushed Shi Sinan's head away. "Ouch!" Shi Sinan cried out. "Mom, your ring hooked on my hair." Shi Sinan bent over and shouted at Ning Shu. Ning Shu said, "Don't move. I'll take it off." Ning Shu looked at Shi Sinan's seaweed-like hair and pulled out a few strands. Shi Sinan gasped in pain. Ning Shu put away her hair and tore off the strands that were wrapped around the ring. Shi Sinan rubbed her head. Ning Shu asked, "Mom, why are you looking for me?" "I'm just here to see you." Ning Shu turned and went to the bathroom. Shi Sinan immediately shouted, "Mom," her voice was very loud, as if she was reminding the person in the bathroom. Ning Shu pulled open the bathroom door, and a huge fist came flying towards her face. Ning Shu dodged it without thinking and even sent Shi Sinan to Shi Muqing's fist without leaving a trace. When Shi Muqing saw Shi Sinan, he immediately wanted to retract his fist. Although he reduced his strength when he turned sideways, his fist still brushed Shi Sinan's nose. Shi Sinan immediately had a nosebleed and fainted. Shi Muqing frowned and looked very anxious. He hurriedly squatted down and held Shi Sinan. Shi Sinan's face was covered in blood and her eyes were tightly shut. Shi Muqing glanced at Ning Shu with a bone-chilling gaze, then picked up Shi Sinan and prepared to leave the room. Ning Shu quickly ran behind Shi Muqing, stretched out his hand, grabbed Shi Muqing's hair, and pulled hard, pulling out a lot of Shi Muqing's hair. Shi Muqing let out a muffled groan. Because he was focused on Shi Sinan and was holding her in his arms, Shi Muqing was caught off guard by Ning Shu's sudden attack and was ambushed. Shi Muqing looked at Ning Shu and coldly said, "Even a vicious tiger wouldn't eat its cubs. You actually treated your daughter like this." Although Ning Shu's movements were concealed, Shi Muqing could still see that this woman was using her daughter as a meat shield. Shi Muqing looked at Ning Shu in disgust. You and your mother are the same kind of bitch, heartless bitch. A slut who revolves around two men and plays with them in the palm of her hand. Shi Muqing's voice was filled with killing intent. The woman Shi Muqing was talking about was Shirlina's mother, who had caused the Shi brothers to turn against each other. Ning Shu coldly mocked, "What right do you have to say such things? This is the Shi family's business. What does it have to do with you? What do you think you are? An arbitrator? What does the Shi family owe you?" It was baffling. Shi Muqing looked down at Shi Sinan, whose nose was bleeding like a stream. He didn't talk to Ning Shu anymore and quickly left with Shi Sinan in his arms. Soon, the sound of an engine could be heard outside the house. Ning Shu looked down and saw a lot of blood on the ground. Shi Muqing's fist was really strong. Ning Shu left the bedroom and saw the blood on the stairs. He said to the servant, "Wipe the blood in Mrs. room quickly." "Yes, sir." Ning Shu was about to go to the hospital to see Shi Sinan when he received a call from the detective agency. They said that half an hour ago, the police raided Shi Muqing's clubhouse. A lot of people were arrested, especially those who were rich. Half an hour ago, wasn't Shi Muqing flirting with Shi Sinan? Shi Muqing should have received the news by now. On one side was the clubhouse where he laid his golden egg, and on the other side was his lover. TSK, TSK, TSK. What a dilemma. Ning Shu asked his secretary to check which hospital Shi Sinan was at. After the secretary checked the address, Ning Shu drove to the hospital. Ning Shu arrived at Shi Sinan's ward. Shi Muqing wasn't in the ward. He had obviously gone to deal with the sudden crisis. Shi Muqing wasn't with Shi Sinan to wait for her to wake up. Ning Shu walked to the bed and saw that Shi Sinan's head was wrapped in gauze. Blood was gradually seeping out of the gauze around her nose. Ning Shu called the doctor over to change the gauze. If the blood was allowed to flow to her throat, she might suffocate to death. Dr. Ning Shu asked, "How is my daughter?" "Serious soft tissue contusion," the doctor said. "Her nasal bone is cracked and she has a concussion." Ning Shu was speechless. Shi Muqing was indeed ruthless. If this punch had landed on her face, she would have definitely died. "Treat her well. Money isn't a problem," Ning Shu said. Ning Shu stayed in the ward for a while before leaving for work. Taking advantage of the fact that Shi Muqing was busy with the clubhouse, Ning Shu took away several of Shi Muqing's projects in the company. 2 projects were directly withdrawn because the partners of these 2 projects were Shi Muqing's company. On the surface, the legal representative of these companies wasn't Shi Muqing, but the company was indeed Shi Muqing's. The cooperation agreement was simply giving money to Shi Muqing's company. Ning Shu directly withdrew it. Taking the Shi family's money, killing the Shi family's people, and torturing the Shi family's daughter. What did the Shi family do wrong to be treated like this? Shi Muqing's secretary saw Ning Shu like this and hurriedly said, "President, shouldn't we ask Vice President Gu for instructions on this matter?" Ning Shu's face was cold. "What's there to ask? I'm the president. I have the final say." Ning Shu looked at Shi Muqing's secretary and said, "Secretary Li, right? You took advantage of your work and accepted bribes. Now you're fired from the company." Secretary Li was stunned and then said, "I'm the vice president's man. If I want to leave, it's the vice president who asked me to leave. Moreover, I didn't accept any bribes. This company belongs to the Shi family. I don't need to go through so much trouble to fire a secretary. Not only did you accept bribes, but you also harassed female employees. Someone has already reported you to the company." Secretary Li's face was ashen. He turned around and left the office to call Shi Muqing. Shi Muqing was busy with the clubhouse's matters. Many of the clubhouse's employees had been arrested. Now, Shi Muqing wanted to clear the way. Why would he care about an insignificant person like a small secretary? Those cooperation cases were just small profits to Shi Muqing. The clubhouse was the hen that laid the golden eggs. How could Secretary Li not know that he had become the cannon fodder in the battle between the two sides? Now, he wanted to fight for his rights. Secretary Li said, "President, give me a year's salary and half of the salary bonus." Ning Shu heard Secretary Li say that he wanted a year's salary and 50% of the salary bonus, which meant that he wanted a year and a half's salary. The salary of a high-ranking secretary of a company was definitely not low. After being fired, he could still ask for a year and a half's salary. Giving him 3 months' salary was already extremely benevolent. Where was his face? How could he have the nerve to ask? Chapter 783. Ning Shu didn't intend to be polite to Shi Muqing's people. Shi Muqing's men were like this because Shi Muqing deliberately indulged them. If this company collapsed, it would be a good thing for Shi Muqing. Ning Shu didn't say anything and directly took out his phone to call the police. A man who was never content was like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. Secretary Li saw that Ning Shu was about to call the police and immediately said, "President, I don't want the bonus. Just give me my salary." If he was really taken out of the company by the police, his career would be over. No company would dare to hire him in the future. Ning Shu looked at the secretary. This secretary had a bad reputation in the company and had molested many female employees. Because of Shi Muqing's outstanding appearance and status in the company, he attracted many female employees who tried to get close to him. The closest to Shi Muqing was naturally the secretary. Many female employees tried to curry favor with Secretary Li to get the chance to get along with Shi Muqing. Secretary Li had coaxed and molested many women, not only for money but also for sex. The female employees could only endure it. "President, it's not moral for you to do this. What good will it do for the company if you call the police?" "It will affect the company's image," Secretary Li said. Ning Shu sneered. This kind of person was a scourge wherever he went. Ning Shu called the police. He had to make an example out of him. The company's ethos was messed up by this kind of person. When Secretary Li saw that Ning Shu really called the police, his face turned pale. He fell to the ground and couldn't get up for a long time. After that, Secretary Li was taken away by the police. Soon, the court would hold a trial for Secretary Li. Then, Ning Shu asked his secretary to report Secretary Li's matter to the company. He only said that Secretary Li had accepted bribes and didn't mention Secretary Li's molestation of female employees. Anyway, Ning Shu denied all doubts about Shi Muqing's cooperation case. While he wasn't in the company, he could withdraw as much as he could. Anyway, he wanted to take away Shi Muqing's power in the company. No matter what Old Master Li thought, the Shi family's company had to be protected. Shi Muqing had to be left with nothing. After finishing these things, Ning Shu went to the hospital to see Shi Sinan. Shi Sinan had already woken up, but because of a concussion, she was dizzy and nauseous now. Shi Sinan's face was extremely pale, and her eyes were watery. She looked very pitiful. When Shi Sinan saw Ning Shu, her eyes were filled with disappointment. She scanned the room and didn't see the person she wanted to see, so she closed her eyes. Ning Shu sat by the bed and asked, "Does it hurt?" Shi Sinan didn't want to speak. Otherwise, if she tugged at the gauze, her nose would hurt a lot. Now, Shi Sinan's nose was so swollen that it blocked Shi Sinan's vision. Because Shi Sinan had a concussion and had symptoms of nausea and vomiting, she couldn't even eat now. But Shi Sinan was very hungry. She looked at Ning Shu and said with difficulty, "I'm hungry." Shi Sinan's stomach was empty. When she woke up, she had vomited all of it. Now, Shi Sinan could only eat a little liquid food. Ning Shu got some porridge from the hospital's cafeteria, but this porridge was very bland. It was made from the dry rice in the afternoon, and it was like drinking water from a pot. Ning Shu scooped up the porridge with a spoon and fed it to Shi Sinan. Shi Sinan opened her mouth with difficulty and drank the porridge with a look of disdain in her eyes. Ning Shu scooped another spoonful of porridge and brought it to her mouth. Shi Sinan turned her head away and didn't eat. Since Shi Sinan didn't want to eat anymore, Ning Shu didn't feed her and put the bowl of porridge on the bedside table. The ward was quiet. Ning Shu and Shi Sinan looked at each other speechlessly. Now, the mother-daughter relationship between the two of them was basically gone. Ning Shu wouldn't dote on Shi Sinan like the original owner of this body. Shi Sinan had always felt wronged and angry in her heart. In fact, she was still waiting for Ning Shu to apologize. Shi Sinan couldn't take it if a person who had been good to her for almost 20 years suddenly treated her badly. A person who didn't treat her well suddenly showed a little gentleness and compromised. It was a classic case of late-stage Stockholm Syndrome. Ning Shu stood up and planned to leave. There were more things waiting for him to do, and he wouldn't waste time on Shi Sinan. Before Ning Shu could finish speaking, the phone on the table not far from the hospital bed rang. Shi Sinan heard the phone ring and looked a little excited. She even sat up from the hospital bed. But she quickly lay back down. Because of this movement, she felt dizzy and wanted to vomit. The wound on her nose was throbbing with pain. Shi Sinan felt a wet, sticky, and warm liquid flowing out of her nose. The phone on the table was still ringing and vibrating. Shi Sinan looked at Ning Shu. "Mom." Shi Sinan looked at the phone anxiously, and then looked at Ning Shu longingly. Her eyes darted around. But now that her lips were as pale as paper, he knew that she wasn't in a good condition. The power of love was really great. Ning Shu picked up the phone on the table and looked at the caller ID. It was his uncle. Ning Shu hung up immediately and said to Shi Sinan, "You're not in the right condition to answer the phone right now. Take care of yourself." "Mom." Shi Sinan's voice was shrill as she shouted at Ning Shu. After Ning Shu hung up the phone, her eyes dimmed a lot, and the gauze was soaked by the blood flowing out of her nose. Ning Shu pressed the emergency call button at the head of the bed to inform the doctor to come over. Shi Sinan looked at Ning Shu stubbornly. "Why did you hang up on me?" Ning Shu said indifferently, "I confiscated your phone and bank card." "Where did you get the money to buy a phone?" Needless to say, Shi Muching had bought this phone for her. Ning Shu flipped through the phone's phone book. There was only Shi Muching's phone number saved in the phone, as well as some flirtatious text messages. Ning Shu didn't know why, but he had goosebumps all over his body. He was really disgusted. Shi Sinan should now know that Shi Muching was her uncle. Even if the two of them weren't related by blood, they were relatives in the legal sense. No matter what, it was still rape. But Shi Sinan clearly knew that this was wrong. She called him uncle, but moaned under his body. Ning Shu felt that the shock wave was about to destroy his three views. Shi Sinan looked at Ning Shu in shock. She was shocked that her mother didn't care about her wishes and didn't respect her privacy. She flipped through her phone. "Mom, how could you do this?" Shi Sinan's head hurt very much. How did her mother become like this? Not long after, a doctor came over and pressed Shi Sinan to treat her wound. Ning Shu put the phone on the table and turned to leave. She wouldn't come to the hospital in the future. Whatever happened to Shi Sinan had nothing to do with her. In Shi Sinan's heart, no one in the Shi family was as important as Shi Muching. Women could sometimes kill the existence of their parents for men. Women were men in this life. Men talked about men the most, missed men, and resented men the most. Men, they were all men. Chapter 784. Ning Shu drove back to the villa. When he entered, he saw old Master Shi sitting on the sofa reading the newspaper. Ning Shu called out to the old man, "Father." Old Master Shi folded the newspaper and placed it on the coffee table. He took off his reading glasses and Ning Shu asked, "Why has that girl, Sinan, made you so angry recently?" "That girl said that the injury on her face was because of you." Old Master Shi looked at Ning Shu. "You've been much colder to her recently. Emotional abuse won't solve anything." Ning Shu didn't expect Shi Sinan to push all the blame for her injury onto her. She probably didn't dare to say that her uncle, who was hiding in the bathroom, hit her. This daughter. "Dad, I always have my reasons," Ning Shu said. "No matter what, this girl is still your daughter. She has to bear the responsibility of being a member of the Shi family, no matter what," Old Master Shi said lightly. Ning Shu heard the deeper meaning in Old Master Shi's words. Could it be that Old Master Shi had some arrangements for Shi Sinan? Ning Shu couldn't help but say, "Dad, do you know who Shi Muqing is? Why did you bring him home?" "I know," Old Master Shi said calmly. "Ning Shu, what do you know?" Ning Shu's eyes darted around and he asked, "Do you know that Shi Muqing isn't Uncle's son?" Old Master Shi said, "Don't worry too much about Shi Muqing's background. Anyway, Shi Muqing is already a member of the Shi family." Ning Shu, seeing Old Master Shi like this, Ning Shu suspected that Old Master Shi was eyeing the power in Shi Muqing's hands, or he wanted to get back the money that his cheap uncle took away back then. Ning Shu glanced at Old Master Shi. He didn't know if Old Master Shi knew about the relationship between Shi Sinan and Shi Muqing. "Dad, I'm your daughter. You should tell me everything," Ning Shu said to Grandpa Ning. "Don't let them get into a fight." Ning Shu sighed and said, "Dad, did you know that Shi Muqing and Shi Sinan had that kind of relationship? They are uncle and nephew, but they actually had a husband and wife relationship." The old man frowned. He looked at Ning Shu and asked, "Really? Can I joke about this kind of thing?" Ning Shu said snappily. Ning Shu carefully observed the old man's expression and found that there wasn't much anger on his face. "Father, Shi Muqing doesn't have good intentions. He can't stay in the Shi family," Ning Shu said. The old man looked at Ning Shu and asked, "Putting aside personal prejudice, what do you think of Shi Muqing's ability?" "I have the means and brains," Ning Shu said. The old man nodded. Ning Shu said, "Since something like this happened between them, they should be together." Ning Shu almost knelt down in front of the old man. He stared at the old man in shock and said with a trembling voice, "Dad. Dad, what are you talking about?" The current situation was completely beyond Ning Shu's imagination. Ning Shu couldn't help but dig his ears and look at the old man. "Shi Muqing is your son," Ning Shu said with a trembling voice. "Shi Muqing is a capable person. With him around, the Shi family will rise to a higher level," the old man said. "Sinan can be the rope that binds Shi Muqing." Ning Shu rolled her eyes unceremoniously. "You think too highly of your granddaughter. She can't be that rope. Heroes have a weakness for beauties. Use softness to conquer strength," the old man said. Ning Shu, "Ha ha ha ha, anyway, you and I won't be able to see Shi Sinan use softness to conquer strength. Shi Muqing is a wolf that can't be tamed." "Dad, it's very dangerous for you to do this," Ning Shu said. "There will be a backlash." Was Shi Muqing someone who was willing to submit to others? Shi Muqing killed Shirlina and the old man who were on top. The old man wanted to use his granddaughter to tie Shi Muqing up, but Shi Muqing held the rope in his hand and swung it casually. Shi Muqing would always be the strong one. "Your granddaughter, don't talk about it." Was this what the old man meant when he said he was responsible for the Shi family? In the end, the Shi family became Shi Muqing's property, and the Shi family didn't exist at all. Ning Shu shook his head. "Dad, believe me. Shi Muqing isn't someone you and I can control, and Sinan definitely can't." The old man said indifferently, "There's nothing that can't be done. You don't have to worry about Sinan. Ning Shu's eyes darted around. He was afraid that the old man didn't only fancy Shi Mucheng, but also other people. In the end, Shi Mucheng schemed against her and ruined her family. Unfortunately, Shirlena didn't know anything and was done for. The old man felt that Shi Mucheng was a talent and wanted him to be used by the Shi family, but Shi Mucheng wanted to take revenge on everyone in the Shi family. Both of them had ulterior motives. The old man brought Shi Mucheng back to the Shi family, and Shi Mucheng followed the old man to the Shi family. Shi Mucheng still had to endure the humiliation of acknowledging a thief as his father. Ning Shu, collapse. Dad, if that's your plan, why did you make Gu Shi Mucheng your son? Ning Shu said unhappily. Then I didn't know that he would fancy Sinan beforehand, the old man said indifferently. Ning Shu smiled. Dad, you're playing with fire. A person like Shi Mucheng should be killed directly, or there would be endless trouble in the future. The old man didn't say anything and stared at the TV. Ning Shu was also watching the news on the TV. This station is reporting that the police raided a certain clubhouse yesterday. This clubhouse is suspected of selling drugs and prostitution. The police arrested nearly 100 people on the spot. Now, this clubhouse is suspected of criminal activities and has been ordered to close down. This station will continue to follow up. Ning Shu looked at the TV and curled his lips. Before this video was sent to the police station, Ning Shu first posted it online. Even if he wanted to cover it, he couldn't. Ning Shu was still very happy. It was enough to make Shi Mucheng's heart ache for a while. Shi Mucheng didn't go home for a few days, and the old man brought the hospitalized Shi Sinan home and hired a senior nurse. There was also a doctor living in the villa. Ning Shu was a little surprised that Shi Sinan had recovered so quickly. Ning Shu looked at Shi Sinan, who was lying on the bed. Her nose was still wrapped in gauze, and there was an 4-drip stand by the bed. She hadn't recovered yet. Ning Shu asked the old man, why did you bring her back? Can she be discharged like this? The old man said, the girl refused to stay in the hospital. She said that she couldn't stay in the hospital anymore. Ning Shu felt that Shi Sinan didn't like the food in the hospital. The hospital wasn't like home, where there were servants. The hospital wasn't as warm as home. Ning Shu didn't say anything. Shi Sinan's return was only good for her, and she could carry out her plan now. Ning Shu returned to his bedroom and took out the cinnabar pen and yellow paper that he had bought earlier. Ning Shu had to cut the paper himself. Ning Shu had a hard time finding the cinnabar pen, which was really hard to find. Ning Shu first took a shower. After washing his body, hands, and mouth, he mobilized the spirit energy in his body and picked up the cinnabar pen to draw talismans on the yellow paper. Chapter 785. Ning Shu didn't know if he could use the Maoshan technique in this plane, and he didn't know if he could succeed in drawing talismans. The laws of each plane were different. For example, in this plane, there were no ghosts, but in the last plane, there were ghosts everywhere. A little spiritual light was a talisman. Ning Shu held a cinnabar brush in his hand and drew talismans on the yellow paper. The first time he drew Ning Shu, he failed. He drew several consecutive talismans, but they all failed. Could it be that he couldn't draw talismans in this plane, or that the Maoshan technique wasn't flourishing, and there wasn't even any luck in the sect? Ning Shu put down the cinnabar brush. After failing to draw a few talismans, he had to think of other ways. Ning Shu thought about it and set up a spirit gathering array to see if he could draw talismans in an environment with more spiritual energy. After the spirit gathering array was completed, Ning Shu picked up the brush and moved the tip of the brush on the yellow paper. Finally, before the spirit gathering array collapsed, he drew a talisman. After drawing the talisman, Ning Shu was sweating profusely, feeling as if his body had been hollowed out. Even when he was a Taoist priest, he didn't suffer so much, throwing talismans around for fun. The plane suppression was serious. After Ning Shu finished drawing the talisman, he rested for a while and took out the medicinal powder he had prepared before. He also took out Shi Muqing and Shi Sinan's hair, rolled them together, and ignited the hair with a lighter. The hair made a sizzling sound and emitted a smell of burnt protein. Ning Shu put the ashes of the hair into the medicinal powder. Ning Shu held the talisman in his hand and chanted a spell. The talisman was suddenly strung with flames. When the talisman was about to burn out, Ning Shu threw the talisman into the medicinal powder. After doing this, Ning Shu was so tired that he almost stuck his tongue out. He was really tired. Ning Shu packed the medicinal powder, which was specially prepared for Shi Muqing and Shi Sinan. After all, she was Shi Muqing's mother-in-law. As a mother-in-law, she should give her son-in-law something good. I wish you good fortune and harmony. Shi Sinan went home to recuperate. On the same day, Shi Muqing also came back. Because of what happened at the club, Shi Muqing's face was very cold, and his body exuded an aura that kept strangers away. In any case, he was just unhappy, extremely unhappy. When Shi Muqing saw Ning Shu, he narrowed his eyes. His eyes were deep, and it was unknown what he was thinking about, which made his eyes look creepy. It was a scheming gaze. Shi Muqing brushed past Ning Shu and sneered in a low voice. His voice was soft, but it was enough for Ning Shu to hear. Don't be happy too early. Shi Muqing went upstairs to Shi Sinan's room. Ning Shu turned around and looked at Shi Muqing's back view. She wasn't happy at all. The clubhouse was just the tip of the iceberg in Shi Muqing. Old Master Shi, such a person would never coexist peacefully with the Shi family. Ning Shu followed him upstairs and passed by Shi Sinan's room. He saw Shi Muqing sitting by the bed and talking to Shi Sinan. Although her face was wrapped in bandages, Shi Sinan's eyes were filled with affection, shyness, and happiness. Ning Shu shook his head and returned to his bedroom to take out the medicinal powder. He chuckled. Shi Muqing said a few words to Shi Sinan, then drove away from the villa. After Shi Muqing left, Ning Shu went to the kitchen and saw a chicken stewing in a clay pot. Ning Shu put the medicinal powder in the pot. He stirred it twice with a spoon and scooped a bowl of chicken soup for Shi Sinan. Ning Shu brought the chicken soup to Shi Sinan's room. Because her nose was seriously injured, Shi Sinan's eyes were bruised and swollen. Shi Sinan looked at Ning Shu and didn't call out to Ning Shu. Ning Shu didn't care at all and said to Shi Sinan, "Drink some chicken soup." The chicken soup was quite fragrant, and there were a few green onions floating on it, but it smelled a little medicinal. Ning Shu scooped up the chicken soup with a spoon and said, "Your head is injured, so I added some gastrodia alata. It's good for your body." Shi Sinan drank the chicken soup in the spoon, and Ning Shu scooped up another spoonful. Like this, Shi Sinan finished the whole bowl of soup. Ning Shu took the bowl and leaned against Shi Sinan's desk. He discreetly stuck a bug under the desk. After he was done, Ning Shu said indifferently, "I don't know why, but the complexion of the family members hasn't been good recently. Your grandfather's back and legs hurt. It was too hard to run a business when he was young. Your uncle's complexion hasn't been good recently." When Shi Sinan heard Ning Shu say that Shi Muqing wasn't feeling well, her eyes moved, and she said, "Mom, there's still some chicken soup, right?" Ning Shu nodded. "Do you still want to drink it?" "I don't want to drink it now. Can you save the chicken soup?" "I'll drink it tonight," Shi Sinan said, her eyes filled with tenderness. Ning Shu grunted. She probably wanted to save this chicken soup for Shi Muqing. "Your grandfather isn't feeling well either." Shi Sinan directly ignored it. Shi Muqing came back in the middle of the night and went straight to Shi Sinan's room. Ning Shu was practicing his ultimate martial arts when he heard the soft sound of the door opening in the room next door. Ning Shu took the remaining medicinal powder and quickly went downstairs. He went into the kitchen and sprinkled the remaining medicinal powder into the clay pot. The chicken soup was kept warm to see if Shi Mucheng would drink it. After he was done, Ning Shu hurried back to the house. As soon as he entered the house, he heard the sound of the door next door opening. Shi Mucheng had obviously come out. Ning Shu didn't know if Shi Mucheng would drink the chicken soup, but if Shi Sinan let him drink it, he would most likely drink it. Shi Mucheng had suffered so much, so Shi Sinan had to let him drink some chicken soup to nourish his body. She was so worried about her uncle. Not long after, Ning Shu saw Shi Mucheng enter Shi Sinan's room with a bowl through the crack in the door. Ning Shu turned on the computer and plugged his earphones into his ears. He wanted to hear what the two of them were talking about and whether Shi Mucheng had taken the medicine. Shi Mucheng entered the room with the chicken soup, sat by the bed, and said to Shi Sinan, "Come, uncle will feed you." Shi Sinan carefully looked at Shi Mucheng and saw that his brows were furrowed. There was indeed a trace of anxiety and fatigue between his brows. Shi Sinan's heart throbbed a little, and there was a sense of sourness and heartache. Shi Sinan said to Shi Mucheng, "Uncle, I won't drink it." "You drink it." Shi Mucheng scooped a spoonful of chicken soup and brought it to Shi Sinan's mouth. "Uncle won't drink it." "Sinan, drink it and get better quickly. Uncle misses Sinan very much." Shi Mucheng's words were very ambiguous. When Shi Sinan heard Shi Mucheng's voice, she only felt her heart pounding and her blood rushing to her nose. Her nose was about to bleed again. Shi Sinan shook her head and said, "I've already drunk it. I left this for you. Drink it." Shi Mucheng curled his lips into a smile, which made his face look unusually handsome. "Uncle, thank you for thinking so in Sinan's heart." Shi Mucheng's voice was low and sexy. "You take a sip first, and I'll take a sip." Shi Sinan had no choice but to take a sip first. Shi Mucheng's eyes were deep. When he saw Shi Sinan drink it, he used the spoon that Shi Sinan had used to drink the soup. When he drank the chicken soup with the spoon, his eyes were always on Shi Sinan. Shi Mucheng stuck out his tongue and licked the corner of his mouth. Shi Sinan's face was red, and she didn't dare to meet Shi Mucheng's seductive and ambiguous gaze. Chapter 786. Shi Sinan and Shi Mucheng each drank a mouthful of the chicken soup. Perhaps it was because the atmosphere between them was too ambiguous, but after drinking the soup, both of them felt warm. Shi Mucheng looked at Shi Sinan with a deep gaze. Shi Sinan didn't dare to meet Shi Mucheng's gaze. Her uncle's gaze swept over her body, bringing with it a string of flames, making Shi Sinan feel hot all over and her blood boil. Shi Mucheng reached out and pressed his hand on Shi Sinan's hand. His thumb slowly rubbed Shi Sinan's skin in an extremely ambiguous manner. "Uncle." Shi Sinan called out uneasily, especially when she saw that her uncle's eyes were a little red. She was a little scared. Shi Mucheng narrowed his eyes. He felt the boiling power in his body, which made him want to press the woman in front of him under his body and ravage her fiercely. The woman in front of him was full of attraction to him, an incomparable attraction. Shi Mucheng's breathing became rapid, and his eyes were filled with Shi Sinan. She was lying on the bed flirtatiously, her hair spread out on the bed like seaweed, and the wound on her face seemed to have healed. She was smiling at him. Shi Mucheng felt that the heat in his abdomen was about to explode. Shi Mucheng couldn't help but reach out and caress Shi Sinan's face. "Ouch, it hurts, uncle, it hurts." Shi Sinan's nose hurt from Shi Mucheng's hand, as if she had been severely injured. It was so painful that tears fell. Shi Mucheng was in a daze for a moment. When he saw that Shi Sinan's face was wrapped in gauze, he quickly withdrew his hand. "Are you okay?" "Uncle, you're hurting my face," Shi Sinan couldn't help but say. At the same time, her body was unbearably hot. Even though her nose had been touched by Shi Mucheng, her body yearned for her uncle's touch even though it hurt. Shi Mucheng felt that something was wrong. He said to Shi Sinan, "Have a good rest." Then he turned and left Shi Sinan's bedroom. Shi Sinan looked at Shimucheng's back view and felt lost. Her body was dry as she looked at Shimucheng's broad shoulders. Thinking of what had happened at the hotel earlier, Shi Sinan's body was a little restless. "Oh my God, what are you thinking? He's your uncle." Shi Sinan couldn't help but shake her head, but her body was soft and hot. Shimucheng returned to his room. He first drank a large glass of water, but his mouth was still dry, and his mind was filled with thoughts of Shi Sinan's body. When Shimucheng went to the bathroom to take a shower, he washed his body with cold water again and again. He was well dressed and well fed. He did it again and again, and he became more and more excited. In the end, he made his legs tremble before Shimucheng stopped. This troublesome vixen. Shimucheng's mind was filled with Shi Sinan. Shimucheng couldn't hold himself back. It was a pity that Shi Sinan was injured. Otherwise, Shimucheng would have rushed to Shi Sinan's room right now. Shimucheng lay on the bed and felt that his waist was a little sore. He just thought that he had rubbed too much. On the other side, Ning Shu took off his headphones. Knowing that Shimucheng had drunk the chicken soup, Ning Shu smiled. "You must be happy, Faik." Ning Shu gave the two of them an aphrodisiac that could make them sleep with 30 women in a single night. He used their hair to bind the two of them together. As long as the two of them met, as long as they saw each other, they would be ready to make a move. No matter the time, place, or occasion, they would be ready to make a move. The next second, they would want to stick together and be entangled. And they were only attractive to each other. They were not interested in anyone else. Ning Shu smiled. In order to prevent her son-in-law from having an affair, she was only interested in her daughter. She was really worried sick. Oh, Shi Sinan was also injured now. He didn't know if she would go into battle with an injury. Ning Shu turned off his computer and started to cultivate. Shimucheng had suffered such a big loss. He would definitely take revenge. After cultivating for a night, Ning Shu felt very comfortable. When he went downstairs, he saw Old Master talking to Shimucheng. Old Master said something that made Shimucheng's expression and gaze look sarcastic. Ning Shu, to be honest, Ning Shu suspected that Shimucheng was Old Master's son. Otherwise, why would Old Master treat Shimucheng so well? He even wanted to betroth his granddaughter to Shimucheng. It was said that a person like Shimucheng couldn't be taken in for his own use. Ning Shu went downstairs and shouted to Old Master Shi, "Dad, what are you talking about?" When Old Master Shi saw Ning Shu, he smiled and said, "We're talking about some things between men." Ning Shu looked at Old Master Shi and Shimucheng suspiciously. Old Master Shi saw Ning Shu's gaze and said, "I'm just asking if Shimucheng has a girl he likes. He'll be 30 in 2 years. It's time to start a family." Shimucheng's face was cold. It wasn't up to the Shi family to decide on his marriage. Ning Shu, was Old Master Shi testing Shimucheng? It would be strange if Shimucheng said that he liked Shi Sinan. While they were eating breakfast, Ning Shu was observing Shimucheng. Shimucheng's cheeks were a little red. It was obvious that the medicine had entered his body. The medicine would slowly seep into his skin and hollow out his body. Shimucheng met Ning Shu's gaze and said indifferently, "Sister, why are you looking at me? Or do you like your younger brother's face?" Ning Shu smiled and said, "Amitabha. All appearances are illusory. Beauty is just a skeleton." Shimucheng sneered. After breakfast, Ning Shu drove to work. However, when the car was passing through the traffic lights, the car's brakes couldn't stop. Ning Shu cursed in his heart. Shimucheng, this bitch. Moreover, it was rush hour now. The sidewalk was densely packed with people. If she crashed into them, she would hit at least 5 or 6 people. Moreover, the car couldn't stop at all. If something happened, she wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. She caused a problem with Shi Muqing's car, and Shi Muqing turned around to take revenge. Ning Shu suspected that all her cars had been tampered with. Ning Shu's palms were sweating as he held the steering wheel. He pulled the gear to the lowest and looked left and right. He couldn't hit pedestrians, so he could only hit the flower bed railing in the middle. Ning Shu turned the steering wheel fiercely, and the friction between the car and the ground made a sharp ear-piercing sound. The car slammed into the railing with a loud bang. Ning Shu's head hit the steering wheel. He suddenly felt dizzy and there was warm blood flowing out. Because Ning Shu suddenly changed lanes, the car behind suddenly stopped, causing several cars to rear-end. The traffic police hurriedly surrounded Ning Shu's car with roadblocks. Ning Shu wiped the blood that flowed out, opened the door and got out. He said to the police, "I'm responsible for this accident because my car's brakes were broken." Ning Shu's car was towed away by a tow truck. Ning Shu went to the police station to give a statement. Ning Shu also compensated the cars behind. In any case, this matter was suppressed to the minimum. Chapter 787. The car that was being towed was checked at the garage. There were only a few copper wires left in the brake cable, and it would definitely break after 2 more steps. And this morning, the copper wires were broken, and the brake cable was completely broken. Ning Shu paid some fines and left the police station. Ning Shu pursed his lips tightly and hailed a taxi home. Ning Shu called the car repair company to come to the villa to tow the car. All the cars in the house had to be checked. Shi Muqing, that bastard. When they arrived at the villa, Ning Shu got out of the taxi and rushed straight in. Old Master Shi was playing chess with Shi Muqing, and Shi Sinan was slowly walking around with the help of the caregiver. Although Shi Muqing was playing chess with Old Master Shi, his eyes were always on Shi Sinan. His eyes scanned every part of her body, as if he wanted to peel off Shi Sinan's clothes. Shi Sinan was very embarrassed and lowered her head shyly. Ning Shu walked into the living room without even changing his shoes. His high heels made a crisp clicking sound on the porcelain white floor. Old Master Shi Muqing, and Shi Sinan all looked at Ning Shu. "Didn't you go to work? Your head." Before Old Master Shi could finish speaking, Ning Shu directly lifted the chessboard and threw it at Shi Muqing. Shi Muqing dodged at once and stood aside looking at Ning Shu with a half-smile. When Shi Sinan saw that Shi Muqing dodged, she let out a heavy sigh and her expression relaxed. Old Master Shi frowned and asked, "Lena, what are you doing? Didn't you go to work?" "Dad, I was in a car accident just now and almost couldn't make it back." "Someone tampered with the brakes," Ning Shu said coldly. "Now I want to vent my anger." "Ha! What evidence do you have that your car accident has something to do with me?" "I tampered with the brakes." "You don't know how to maintain your car, and now you're blaming me?" Shi Muqing's face was full of sarcasm. Shi Sinan was supported by the caregiver and walked in front of Ning Shu. Ning Shu said, "Mom, Uncle wouldn't do such a thing." "Ning Shu, gun." Ning Shu looked at Shi Sinan expressionlessly. "I still have a square bandage on my head. Are you fucking blind?" Shi Sinan was a little scared by Ning Shu's gaze. Her mother was no longer who she used to be. Shi Sinan plucked up her courage and said, "Mom, Uncle really wouldn't do that kind of thing. I hope Mom and Uncle can get along peacefully. When will this end?" One death was enough. Ning Shu looked at Shi Sinan. She looked so pitiful. "Did I bully my own daughter? Even your daughter doesn't believe you. I really feel sorry for you." Shi Muqing's face was filled with deep ridicule. Ning Shu rolled his eyes. He already knew what kind of person Shi Sinan was. What was there to be sad about? You should be the one feeling sad about having such a wife. The person he would spend his entire life with. Thinking of this, Ning Shu felt that it was very interesting. When you have nothing and still have such a wife, that would be beautiful. Mom, it's not that I don't believe you. Shi Sinan hurriedly waved her hand. I just don't want to see you two so hostile. You are all Sinan's family. If anything happens to any of you, I'll be sad. Go play somewhere else. Ning Shu bent down and grabbed a handful of chess pieces. He took one and threw it heavily at Shi Mucheng. Shi Mucheng tilted his head to avoid the chess piece, which hit an antique bottle. Shi Mucheng looked at the broken bottle on the ground and turned his head to look coldly at Ning Shu. His gaze was bone-chilling. You're biting people like a mad dog. What evidence do you have to prove that your car's problem has anything to do with me? Shi Sinan was also frightened and looked at Ning Shu in a daze. What evidence do I need to hit you? I just want to hit you. Ning Shu mobilized the energy in his dantian and threw a chess piece at Shi Mucheng. Although Shi Mucheng dodged it, there were still a few chess pieces on his body. Shi Mucheng, who was hit by a chess piece, was in great pain. The place where he was hit swelled up at a rapid speed. Shi Mucheng looked indifferently at Ning Shu. You're courting death. Shi Mucheng took off his jacket and raised his chin slightly. Ning Shu picked up the chessboard on the ground and threw it at Shi Mucheng. Shi Mucheng kicked the chessboard away and stretched out his hand. His fingers bent and went straight for Ning Shu's neck. Ning Shu dodged Shi Mucheng's attack and fought with him. Every time Ning Shu fought with Shi Mucheng, she felt that the other party's body was very stiff. Instead, her hands and feet were numb from the shock. Ning Shu knew that Shi Mucheng knew grappling techniques, but she didn't expect him to be so powerful. He basically targeted her vital parts, attacking her head, neck, and ribs. Grappling techniques were very easy to cripple, especially now that Shi Mucheng was attacking without holding back. Ning Shu had to protect her vital parts and cause harm to Shi Mucheng. If she hadn't cultivated peerless martial arts, Ning Shu didn't think she could confront Shi Mucheng. Now, the two sides were staring at each other's weaknesses. Ning Shu took a deep breath and looked at Shi Mucheng with some seriousness. Shi Mucheng's expression was not worried. He suspected that his grappling skills had deteriorated. How could he not even beat a woman? Ning Shu picked up a chair and threw it at Shi Mucheng. Shi Mucheng also picked up a chair. The two chairs collided and the table legs flew far away. The whole living room was a mess. Shi Sinan was so anxious that she didn't know what to do. She kept shouting, "Stop fighting, stop fighting." Ning Shu and Shi Mucheng ignored Shi Sinan. They threw away the broken chairs in their hands and fought with their fists and feet. Ning Shu raised his foot and kicked Shi Mucheng's chest heavily. Shi Mucheng covered his chest and took a few steps back. Shi Mucheng said with an evil smile, "You've succeeded in pissing me off." Shi Mucheng moved his neck left and right. His neck made a cracking sound. Ning Shu, you have cervical spondylosis. Ning Shu shook his wrist and stared at Shi Mucheng without blinking. He didn't dare to lose focus. If he did, Shi Mucheng would hit his vital parts. Enough, stop. The old man's face was cold. You've grown up now. Ning Shu and Shi Mucheng stared at each other, their eyes full of sparks. Ning Shu saw that Shi Mucheng's face was flushed, and even his neck had turned red. The blood vessels on his neck were slightly protruding, and the blood inside was flowing quickly. Ning Shu smiled in his heart. Now that he was exercising like this, the blood flow was speeding up, and the diffusion would speed up and invade Shi Mucheng's internal organs and muscles. But this guy's grappling skills were still extraordinarily strong. He probably practiced them since he was a child. It was difficult to get close. The old man stood between Ning Shu and Shi Mucheng and said, "Don't make trouble anymore. What can't you talk about? You're fighting." Ning Shu just stared at Shi Mucheng. Shi Mucheng didn't speak, and the atmosphere seemed quite stagnant. Shi Sinan stood there, not knowing who to care about or what to say. Chapter 788. Shi Sinan kept glancing at Shi Muqing with worry in her eyes. In this house, Shi Muqing was more attractive to her than anyone else. As soon as she saw Shi Muqing, she felt her heart palpitate and her whole body was uncomfortable. Her mind was filled with thoughts of Shi Muqing's body. Shi Sinan didn't know what was wrong with her. Even though the atmosphere was so stagnant now, and her mother and uncle were fighting, Shi Sinan was actually thinking about doing that kind of thing with her uncle. Her mind was filled with her uncle's body. Shi Sinan's lower body was a little wet, which made Shi Sinan feel very ashamed. Did she really fall in love with her uncle? Old Master Shi's expression was very dignified as he said coldly, "What the hell is going on? You said that you smashed the table and hit people as soon as you came back." Old Master Shi looked at Ning Shu. Ning Shu said, "I was unhappy, so I vented." "Do you think you're still young? You're already 40 years old, yet you're still not mature," Old Master Shi said angrily. Old Master Shi looked at Shi Muqing. "You're a man. You're not manly at all to hit a woman. As a man, bullying the weak is very demeaning. A man's strength is not shown by hitting a woman." Shi Muqing just sneered. To him, there was no distinction between men and women, old and weak. They were all enemies. Don't make a fuss about today's matter. You'll be seen as a joke for no reason. Old Master Shi glanced at Ning Shu and Shi Muqing. Ning Shu reluctantly said yes. At this moment, someone from the car repair company came to tow the car. When he walked in and saw the mess in the hall, he asked, "Do we need to tow the car here?" "Tow the car?" Shi Sinan looked at Ning Shu. Ning Shu stared at Shi Muqing and said indifferently, "I have to check the car." "You escaped this time, but you might not be able to do it next time." Shi Muqing sneered coldly, his expression very disapproving. Ning Shu glanced at Shi Sinan, who was staring straight at Shi Muqing, and sneered in his heart. He went to the garage to get the car. Shi Muqing picked up his coat and went into his room, leaving only Old Master Shi and Shi Sinan in the living room. "Grandfather?" Shi Sinan shouted at Old Master Shi, "What should we do now? The relationship between mother and uncle is so tense now." The old man looked deeply at Shi Sinan and said, "Your mother and your uncle don't like each other, so we can only reduce their conflict. I see that you usually have a good relationship with your uncle. Try to persuade him more. As for your mother, I'll talk to her." When Shi Sinan heard the old man's words, for some reason, her heart actually beat very fast. She stammered a little as she said, "I understand, Grandpa." The old man said, "I'm going to your Grandpa Zhou's house. Take your uncle with you, okay?" "I got it, Grandpa," Shi Sinan said. After Old Master Shi left, Shi Sinan said to the nurse beside her, "I'm fine. You can go back first." The nurse nodded and left. Shi Sinan walked toward Shi Muqing's room. When she reached the door, she was a little nervous and swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Shi Sinan felt like she was a lamb in a tiger's den. But her body was very restless. She wanted to see Shi Muqing. This feeling was very strong. She wanted her uncle to hug or kiss her. With this thought, Shi Sinan's body trembled nervously. She knocked on Shi Muqing's door. Shi Muqing opened the door. He wasn't wearing his clothes, revealing his strong body. There were some parts of his body that were red and swollen. Shi Sinan's gaze was scalded. She hurriedly looked away, not knowing where to put her hands and feet. She could feel the other party's eyes roaming over her body. Wherever he looked, her skin would be boiling hot. Shi Sinan regretted knocking on the door. She hurriedly turned around and was about to leave. "Come in." Shi Muqing took Shi Sinan's arm and pulled her into the room. Shi Sinan walked into her uncle's room, feeling very nervous. This was the first time she had been to her uncle's room. She felt that the whole room was filled with her uncle's scent. This. Shi Sinan was very flustered. Grandpa said not to lower yourself to mother's level. Shi Muching lay on the bed and looked straight at Shi Sinan. Come here. Shi Sinan looked at the sexy and seductive Shi Muching and swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Come here. Shi Muching said again. His voice was a little hoarse. He felt that his body urgently needed to vent and ruthlessly whip and torture this woman. Shi Sinan obediently went over and was pulled down onto the bed by Shi Muching. Shi Muching turned over and pinned Shi Sinan down. Shi Muching didn't stand on ceremony at all. He took off Shi Sinan's clothes and endured until he was sweating. He leaned close to Shi Sinan's ear and said bewitchingly, I'll be gentle. I won't hurt you. Shi Sinan's body was now limp. She didn't have the strength to push Shi Muching away at all. Moreover, she yearned for Shi Muching very much. Shi Muching touched Shi Sinan's lower body and smiled wickedly. It turns out that my niece is also thinking about uncle. You're all wet. Shi Sinan moved uneasily. She bit her lip tightly as she listened to Shi Muching's words. Shi Muching didn't want to hold back anymore. He went straight to the point, and both of them sighed in satisfaction. Shi Muching's movements were very fierce, as if he wanted to tear the woman under him apart. His body had endless strength. Shi Sinan bit her lip tightly and didn't let herself make any embarrassing sounds. Ning Shu asked the car repair company to tow away all the cars in the garage except for Shi Muching's to check if there were any dangerous malfunctions. After all the cars were towed away, Ning Shu returned to the living room. There were two servants tidying up the living room. Shi Sinan and Shi Muching weren't in the living room. Ning Shu went to Shi Sinan's room. When he opened the door, there was no one in the room. Ning Shu went to Shi Muching's room again and heard some noise inside. Ning Shu laughed. The wound on Shi Sinan's nose hadn't healed yet, and they were already rolling around in such a hurry. She would only want to roll more and more. Ning Shu walked away expressionlessly. Ning Shu was about to go to the company when he received a call from the hospital saying that old master had been in a car accident and was now in the hospital for emergency treatment. Damn it! Ning Shu cursed in his heart and rushed to the hospital, ignoring the two people rolling together. When he arrived at the hospital, the lights in the operating room were still on. Ning Shu asked the police, what the hell is going on? Had old master's car been tampered with by Shi Muching? Shi Muching, that bastard. The police said, it was a collision with a truck. The driver was drunk and has been arrested. Ning Shu frowned tightly. A drunk driver? Wasn't he the one who killed Shirlena in the plot? Ning Shu was a little worried about old master. Ning Shu sat in a chair and looked at the operating room door. Old master said that he wanted to use Shi Sinan as a rope to tie up Shi Muching. But now old master was lying on the operating table, and Shi Sinan was lying on Shi Muching's bed. Chapter 789. While waiting for the operation to end, Ning Shu went to see the drunk driver. The driver was detained by the police with handcuffs on his wrists. The driver was a man in his 40s. Even though he had hit someone, he didn't look uneasy. Instead, he looked like he had accepted his fate. This man had killed Shi Sinan last time, and now he had hit the old man. He was on the operating table and his life was in danger. This time, he even had a driver, the old man's driver. Ning Shu's heart was full of murderous intent. He would never let this man off easily. If he wanted to use this method to get money, he would make sure that he didn't get a single cent and would spend the rest of his life in prison. Ning Shu said, please check this person's account and see if a large sum of money has been transferred to her account. When the driver heard Ning Shu's words, a trace of panic flashed across his face and he quickly lowered his head. Interrogate him properly, Ning Shu said. When the time comes, I'll hire a lawyer to sue him. Ning Shu wouldn't let this man off. If he was paid to harm someone, he had to think about the consequences of failure. After seeing the driver, Ning Shu went to the operating room to guard the door. The operating lights went off. Ning Shu quickly stood up and asked anxiously, "Doctor, how is my father?" "Of the two people who came over, one died, and the other is now transferred to the intensive care unit," the doctor said. Ning Shu pursed his lips. The old man's driver was dead. Because he had hit the truck head-on, the front of the car had been deformed. The old man, who was sitting in the back, hadn't suffered as much damage as the driver. In the plot, Shirlena had been driving by herself and had been hit to death. Ning Shu rubbed his forehead and stood outside the sterile ward. Through the glass, he saw the old man lying on the hospital bed with tubes all over his body. Ning Shu pursed his lips tightly and went to see the driver's family. The driver's family was holding the driver's body and crying. The driver had been with the old man for many years. Ning Shu had compensated him with some money. The driver's son was still in college, and Ning Shu had sponsored him until he graduated. The compensation was already very generous. The driver's family couldn't make a fuss anymore. They left with the driver's body in tears. After that, they went to the police station to record a statement. The police were interrogating the driver. The driver admitted that he had drunk alcohol and caused the traffic accident. Previously, Ning Shu had alerted the police. The police checked the driver's account and found that not long ago, his account had an extra 500,000 yuan. Moreover, the driver couldn't tell where the money came from. Ning Shu directly said that the driver was paid to kill someone and deliberately caused the death. "Anyway, I have plenty of time to waste with you. Take your time," Ning Shu lightly said. Even if he surrendered, he would be sentenced to life imprisonment. Even if he went to jail, he wouldn't let this person have an easy time. Ning Shu had never thought that he could involve Shimucheng in this. This alone was not enough to bring down Shimucheng. When they left the police station, it was already dark. Ning Shu hurried back to the villa to get a change of clothes for the old man. Back at the villa, Shimucheng and Shi Sinan were having dinner. Shi Sinan was like a nourished flower, bright and glistening. The hair on the back of her neck was still a little wet, indicating that she had just taken a shower. She really knew how to play. Shimucheng's face was a little flushed, and his eyes were a little red. He seemed to be very thirsty and kept drinking water. When Shi Sinan saw Ning Shu, she called out uneasily, "Mom." Shi Sinan was afraid that her mother and uncle would fight again. In addition, after what had happened with her uncle, Shi Sinan was afraid that her mother would find out. At that time, she only felt like she was floating in the air, happy and comfortable, and she couldn't eat enough. But now, Shi Sinan felt very ashamed, and there was a little pain down there. It was probably because she had done it for too long. Ning Shu grunted and said, "Your grandfather was in a car accident and is now in the hospital." Shi Sinan looked a little shocked and quickly asked, "Is Grandpa okay?" Ning Shu glanced at Shimucheng, who was drinking water, and said indifferently, "Your grandfather hasn't woken up yet, and the driver is dead." Shimucheng curled his lips slightly and turned his head to Ning Shu. He said, "It's really not suitable for the Shi family to go out today. Why are there so many car accidents?" Ning Shu pursed his lips tightly, looked at Shi Sinan, and said, "Come with me to take care of Grandpa." "Okay." Shi Sinan nodded. Ahem, ahem. Shimucheng coughed and said indifferently, "Sinan is still injured. How can you take care of another injured person? It's better to go to the hospital. You can take care of Grandpa and let the doctor treat the wound on your nose more carefully," Ning Shu said. "Besides, I still need to take care of the company. Go take care of Grandpa." Before Shi Sinan could speak, Shimucheng said again, "Sister, your father is lying in the hospital now, and you only have the company in your heart. You're really cold-hearted to let your injured daughter take care of the patient." Ning Shu was speechless. He was so angry, but he still had to keep smiling. Damn it, she was cold-hearted. Now that something had happened to old Master Shi, she still had to stabilize the board of directors and support the company. She had to let Shi Sinan take care of her grandfather. Her heart was cold. Exercise. She could even roll around in bed, so why couldn't she take care of someone? Ning Shu looked at Shi Sinan and asked, "Are you going to the hospital?" Shi Sinan felt two scorching gazes on her. She was sandwiched between her mother and her uncle again, and it was difficult to choose. Shi Sinan looked at the expressionless Ning Shu and then at Shi Muqing, feeling as if her heart was in a pot of oil. "You have to think carefully." Shi Muqing dragged his voice and raised his handsome eyebrows at Shi Sinan. He rubbed his fingers against his lips, and there was a threatening look in his eyes. He was unusually charming. Ning Shu was speechless. "Bitch using a honey trap." Shi Sinan took a deep breath, lowered her head, and whispered to Ning Shu, "Mom, my face hurts." As she said this, Shi Sinan felt uneasy and didn't dare to look at Ning Shu. She continued, "I'm going to see Grandpa tomorrow." "I'm going too," Shi Muqing said with his chin in his hand, his expression full of provocation and smugness. Ning Shu was so angry, what was the use of raising such a daughter? He might as well have a piece of barbecued pork to fill his stomach when he was hungry. Ning Shu turned and went upstairs to old Master Shi's room to look for a change of clothes. Ning Shu carried his bag downstairs and said to Shi Sinan, "I'll be keeping watch at the hospital tonight. I won't be coming back." The corners of Shi Muqing's mouth turned up, and his eyes lit up. Ning Shu left the villa and headed for the hospital. "Have a good time." Once again, she witnessed Shi Sinan's supercilious look. She could do this for a man, but she still looked beautiful and innocent. In Shi Sinan's heart, Shi Lina only cared about work. Because of work, her father divorced her, and she only knew how to give him money. She didn't want money, but she wanted love. Chapter 790. After Shi Sinan refused to go to the hospital to take care of old Master, Ning Shu packed his things and left. Shi Sinan felt very uneasy. She looked at Shi Muqing and said, "Uncle, why don't you let me go to the hospital? Look at how angry Mom is now." Shi Sinan wanted to go to the hospital, but in the face of Shi Muqing's threatening gaze, she could only compromise. She was really afraid that Shi Muqing would tell her about their relationship. Shi Sinan wanted to hide it for as long as she could. Shi Sinan couldn't imagine the expressions on other people's faces. Shi Muqing kept drinking water, but his mouth was dry. He heard Shi Sinan say, "You can go. I'm not stopping you, uncle, you." Shi Sinan was furious. "You're obviously threatening me." Shi Sinan and Shi Muqing were the only ones in the living room. Shi Muqing's body began to stir again. He couldn't control his lower body, and his blood rushed to his head. He looked at Shi Sinan with red eyes. Shi Sinan was still angry that her uncle had stopped her. Seeing her uncle staring straight at her, her heart suddenly beat uncontrollably, and her whole body went weak. Shi Muqing stood up, grabbed Shi Sinan, and pressed her down on the dining table. "Uncle! Uncle!" Shi Sinan stammered. Shi Sinan stuttered and shouted. Facing Shi Muqing's aggressive gaze, Shi Sinan's body softened without any hesitation. "Niece, your uncle is on fire now. You have to be responsible for putting out the fire." Shi Muqing's voice was hoarse. He grabbed Shi Sinan's hand and put it under himself. Shi Sinan suddenly touched something warm. She wanted to withdraw her hand, but Shi Muqing held it tightly. Shi Sinan was sweating all over. Her whole body was hot, and her skin had turned pink. Shi Muqing couldn't control himself and lifted Shi Sinan's skirt in the living room. Shi Muqing pressed Shi Sinan against the dining table, unbuckled his belt, and went straight to the point. Shi Sinan struggled with all her might. She was anxious and embarrassed, and wanted to push Shi Muqing away. "Uncle, this is the living room. Someone will come. Uncle, don't you find it exciting? Shi Muqing wanted to tear Sinan apart. His body was full of restless energy. Shi Sinan's expression was a little dazed, and she fell into incomparable joy. She gradually forgot where she was and hugged Shi Muqing's neck tightly. Shi Sinan felt that she was very thirsty and had an insatiable desire. On the other hand, Shi Muqing felt like he wanted to empty his body for this woman, Shi Sinan. Just as Shi Muqing and Shi Sinan were engaged in a fierce battle, a servant came in and saw this scene. She was stunned. Shi Muqing turned his head to look at the servant with reddened eyes. He immediately pulled down Shi Sinan's skirt, which had already been pulled up to her waist, to cover her body. Shi Muqing suddenly stopped. Shi Sinan looked at Shi Muqing in confusion and called out in dissatisfaction, "Uncle," after being discovered, and now hearing Shi Sinan call him uncle, Shi Muqing actually felt an incomparable sense of pleasure. A warm current flashed through Shi Muqing's heart. It flowed from his spine all the way to his head, and he gave it to Shi Sinan. Shi Sinan grabbed Shi Muqing's shoulder and screamed. Then, she collapsed on the dining table. Shi Muqing leaned on Shi Sinan's body and felt dizzy for a while before he slowly put on his clothes. He glanced at the servant who had been standing there in a daze and said coldly, "Get lost if you don't want to die." When Shi Sinan heard Shi Muqing's words, she turned and saw the servant. She immediately held her head and screamed in fear. "Uncle, what should we do?" Shi Sinan couldn't imagine that if one person knew, everyone else in this villa would know as well. Shi Muqing curled the corners of his lips coldly. "It's okay. You're fired now. If you don't want to die, keep your mouth shut and get lost," Shi Muqing said to the servant, full of murderous intent. The servant was so scared that her face turned pale. What had she seen? The filthy affairs of the wealthy? When she met Shi Muqing's murderous gaze, the servant quivered and turned to run away without even leaving her things behind. "Uncle." Shi Sinan looked at Shi Muqing blankly and fearfully. "What should I do now?" "Uncle, I'm scared." She was afraid that if others found out, they would look at her strangely and laugh at her and her uncle for doing such a thing. She was afraid that her grandfather and mother would kill her if they found out. Shi Muqing curled the corners of his lips and said coldly, "Don't worry, she won't tell anyone." She wouldn't have the chance to tell anyone. Shi Muqing made a call. After hanging up, he said to Shi Sinan, "It's okay, the matter will be resolved." Shi Sinan heaved a sigh of relief. She still trusted her uncle very much in her heart. There was nothing that her uncle couldn't handle. "Uncle, don't go to such a place next time," Shi Sinan said with lingering fear. Shi Muqing curled the corners of his lips. He quite enjoyed this feeling. "I really wish I could stuff you into my body." Shi Sinan lowered her head and didn't dare to look at Shi Muqing. On the other side, Ning Shu was working on his computer outside the intensive care unit. He was checking the email from his secretary when he received a call from the servant at home. The servant's voice was very frightened and trembled as she said that she was looking for him. Ning Shu told the servant the address of the hospital, and the servant hurriedly hung up the phone. Ning Shu raised his eyebrows. What happened? Why was she so frightened? Half an hour later, a servant in a servant's uniform appeared in front of Ning Shu. Ning Shu saw that the servant looked terrified and uneasy, so he handed her a glass of water. "What happened?" "Miss, you must save me." The servant shouted to Ning Shu, tears and snot flowing down her face. Mr. Shi's murderous gaze was still in front of her. "What exactly happened?" Ning Shu asked. The servant swallowed a mouthful of saliva and told him the whole story. Ning Shu, after she left, the two of them got intimate again. Ning Shu smiled. Didn't Shi Muqing have good stamina and good work? Wasn't he a perpetual pile driver? Let's see how long you can be mighty. However, the servant's feeling was not wrong. After such a thing happened, Shi Muqing would definitely kill the servant. Moreover, he wanted to protect his beloved daughter. A random action by the protagonist could change the fate of an insignificant person. For the person he loved, so what if he became the enemy of the world? So what if he killed everyone in the world? Miss, you must believe me. What I said is true, the servant said anxiously to Ning Shu. Stay in the hospital and take care of my father. I won't let anything happen to you, Ning Shu said. Don't spread this around. The servant was moved to tears. Thank you, Mississippi. I won't say anything. She would only say something if she was tired of living. Moreover, one of them was Miss' daughter. If her reputation was ruined, Miss would deal with her first. Ning Shu thought about it and decided to transfer to another hospital. Now, the old man was like a flame in the wind, very fragile. As long as Shi Mucheng removed the old man's oxygen mask, the old man would be able to swallow his last breath. Chapter 791. Old Master Shi was lying here now, and this was the result of indulging the evil wolf. They were all things that could not be tamed, and he still hoped that the beast could feel his kindness. Shi Mucheng, who came with hatred, wished that the Shi family would be wiped out. The doctor did not agree with Ning Shu's transfer. Old Master Shi's condition was not very good now, and transferring at this time could easily cause problems. Old Master Shi's eyelids opened for a moment, and he fell into a coma again. Ning Shu sent some gentle energy to Old Master Shi, which could slowly repair Old Master Shi's body. Ning Shu was determined to transfer and signed the document. Old Master Shi was carried into the car, and the servants followed. When they arrived at the new hospital, Ning Shu asked the hospital to keep Old Master Shi's condition a secret. The hospital system could not find Old Master Shi's name. After doing all these things, the sky was almost bright. After a busy night, Ning Shu moved his neck. If it were not for his peerless martial arts, his body would not be able to stand staying up like this. Old Master Shi had doctors, nurses, and a servant to take care of him. His condition had stabilized, and it was neither good nor bad. Old Master Shi was a little old, and his body could not compare to young people. The car accident made things worse. Ning Shu was a little worried that Old Master Shi would not wake up. He sent some spiritual energy into Old Master Shi's body. Nothing could happen to Old Master Shi yet. The shares in his hands, the funds, and the real estate were not written in a will. Shi Mucheng, the son in the legal sense, also had the right to inherit. Shi Mucheng could forget about getting a single cent from the Shi family. The Shi family did not owe Shi Mucheng anything. Ning Shu received a call from the police station, saying that the driver admitted that he had received money to cause the traffic accident. Ning Shu did not say anything and directly found a criminal lawyer to sue the driver. You won't be able to get 500,000 yuan, and you still have to face jail. Even if you go to jail, you won't have an easy time. You will be tortured in jail. So far, this driver had taken 2 lives. One was Shirlina's, and the other was Old Master Shi's driver. The 500,000 yuan that the driver received was awarded to the Shi family. At the same time, the driver had to compensate the Shi family for the psychological damage. The driver was sentenced to life imprisonment and deprived of all civil rights. Ning Shu used money to bribe the prison bully in the same room as the driver, so he would treat the driver well. The Shi family's chauffeur's family received a generous compensation. In total, the Shi family's chauffeur's family and Ning Shu's compensation amounted to nearly 1 million yuan. Ning Shu wanted his family to leave the city. It was a good thing to have money in their hands, but there was no guarantee that Shi Mucheng would not deal with the Shi family's chauffeur. 1 million was not a small number. The Shi family's chauffeur was an innocent person who was shot and involved in the Shi family's conflict. Thinking that the chauffeur was being paid to harm someone, the Shi family's chauffeur did not hesitate and left the city as quickly as possible. After dealing with these matters, Ning Shu hurriedly went to the company to hold a board meeting. The matter of the old man's car accident couldn't be covered up. The stock market had fallen, and now the shareholders of the board of directors were a little restless. Ning Shu had to ensure that the company operated normally and was profitable so that the shareholders' pockets would not shrink. He was as busy as a dog every day. Ning Shu asked the secretary if she had come to work in Shimucheng. The secretary shook her head and said that the vice president had not come to work for a few days. Ning Shu pursed his lips. She was probably with Shi Sinan every day. She hadn't returned to the villa for a few days, and Shi Sinan hadn't called to ask how her grandfather was doing either. Meeting such a daughter was simply a nightmare. Ning Shu really hated this kind of pure and beautiful person who was not tainted by the secular world. Ning Shu bought a set of silver needles and returned to the villa. Ning Shu also bought some hormone supplements, but this kind of thing could be detected, so it should be used sparingly. It should be effective when combined with acupuncture. When he returned home, there was no one in the living room. It was quiet, not even the servants. "Where is everyone?" Ning Shu shouted. After a while, a servant came over. Ning Shu asked, "Where are the others?" "They're all outside and in the room. Mister," she said, "that we're not allowed to wander around the living room unless we call for help," the servant said. Ning Shu, he was probably afraid that he would be discovered like last time. He really knew how to play. The dining table, sofa, bathroom, balcony, carpet, "Where's Shimucheng?" Ning Shu asked. "Mister, she went out," the servant said. "Where's Sinan?" "Still resting in the room." Ning Shu's lips curled up. This was a good opportunity. He waved his hand and let the servant leave. Ning Shu walked into the kitchen and saw chicken soup simmering in the clay pot. Ning Shu took out the white crystal supplements and poured them in. He stirred it twice with a spoon, then scooped a bowl of soup and went upstairs. He opened Shi Sinan's room. Shi Sinan was lying on the bed sleeping soundly. Her face was no longer wrapped in gauze. Although her nose was still swollen and bruised, it was much better than before. Shi Sinan's face was bright red, and her hair was scattered on the bed. There were some marks on her neck, which were obviously left by Shimucheng. Shi Sinan was like a flower that had been watered. She had the innocence of a young girl and the charm of a woman. She was very beautiful. It was already afternoon, but she was still sleeping. Why wasn't she studying hard and taking the college entrance exam? Ning Shu sat by the bed with the chicken soup and nudged Shi Sinan's body. Shi Sinan didn't open her eyes, but she muttered, "Uncle, let me sleep a little longer. Just a little longer. I'm so tired." Ning Shu rolled his eyes and said loudly, "It's me." Shi Sinan immediately opened her eyes. When she saw that it was Ning Shu, she quickly sat up, looking a little annoyed. Ning Shu called out, "Mom." Ning Shu nodded and handed the chicken soup to Shi Sinan. "Drink it." Shi Sinan felt very guilty. She took the chicken soup and drank it slowly. After a while, she finished the whole bowl of chicken soup. Ning Shu stared at Shi Sinan. Shi Sinan's eyes drifted, and she didn't dare to meet Ning Shu's eyes. "What's the mark on your neck?" Ning Shu reached out to pull Shi Sinan's collar. Shi Sinan immediately covered her clothes and said, "It's nothing. It's just a red lump from a mosquito bite. It's nothing. It's really nothing." It was obviously pinched by someone's mouth. Why did it have to be a mosquito bite? Ning Shu nodded and said, "I'll apply some itch-relieving ointment for you." Shi Sinan was so nervous that she was sweating all over. Ning Shu took the ointment. When he approached Shi Sinan, he held a silver needle and pierced it into the acupuncture point on Shi Sinan's head. Shi Sinan felt numb on her head, as if something had pierced her scalp. She couldn't help but touch it with her hand, but she didn't feel anything. Ning Shu inserted the needle and threw the ointment to Shi Sinan. "Apply it yourself." I'm going to the hospital to see your grandfather. Shi Sinan asked Ning Shu, is Grandpa okay? Ning Shu was speechless. She never took the initiative to call and ask. She only asked now. He didn't know how old Master would feel. Chapter 792. Shi Sinan didn't even care about the Shi family, so how could she be the rope that tied Shi Muching down for the benefit of the Shi family? She didn't have the intelligence to be a rope at all. Seeing that Ning Shu was just staring at her, Shi Sinan hurriedly asked, is Grandpa in a serious condition? Fucking retard. Ning Shu grinned. Fortunately, he's already awake. Shi Sinan heaved a sigh of relief and said with a smile, it's good that Grandpa is fine. Mom, I'll go with you to see Grandpa. The hospital transfer was to avoid Shi Muching. If Shi Sinan knew the address, it meant that Shi Muching knew as well. Ning Shu said lightly, aren't you going to take the exam? Study hard and wait for your university admission letter. Shi Sinan's face turned red. She hadn't been to school for a long time since she was injured. As soon as she said that she wanted to go to school, her uncle was unhappy. He even said that her body hadn't recovered and domineeringly forbade her from going to school. But Shi Sinan still felt sweet in her heart. In the past few days, she and her uncle had been living in their own world and hadn't thought about studying at all. Shi Sinan knew that she wasn't smart. In addition, she hadn't been able to keep up with the classes these days, so it would be a little difficult for her to get into university. Shi Sinan grabbed Ning Shu's arm and shook it coquettishly. Mom, what if I can't get into university? You won't blame me, right? No, why would I? Even if you died in front of me, I wouldn't even blink. Death was too simple. It was better to live than to live. A heart that was being tormented in hell, that was true agony. Ning Shu pushed Shi Sinan's hand away and left with the empty bowl. When Ning Shu went downstairs, he saw Shi Muching. Shi Muching had just returned from outside. The two of them faced each other, full of sarcasm and coldness. Ning Shu sized up Shi Muching. His face was a little flushed, and his lips were very red, like a woman who had put on lipstick. His forehead was sweating. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like he was on fire. Shi Muching was very anxious, because in the past few days, several of his clubs had been raided by the police. Although he had instructed his subordinates to behave and not sell that kind of thing for the time being. However, not only did the buyer become obsessed with the poison, the seller also became obsessed with it. It was a huge profit. Everyone was willing to take the risk because it was all about money. He was caught red-handed by the police. For the past few days, Shi Muching and Shi Sinan had been living happily like gods, but something had happened at the clubhouse. Shi Muching suspected that there were spies from the police on his side. After a thorough cleaning, several corpses sank to the bottom of the sea. When the clubhouse was closed for reorganization, his rival in the underworld opened a clubhouse opposite his clubhouse, blatantly provoking him. Drug trafficking was a big crime. Shi Muching managed to suppress this matter with great difficulty, but the company was found to have evaded taxes and was involved in money laundering activities. It was being investigated. After the investigation, there would definitely be a large fine. Would his business license be revoked? Tax evasion was also reported by others. Shi Muching didn't believe it. Why were the people who reported his businesses? If it wasn't for the fact that someone was targeting him, Shi Muching would have chopped off his own hands. Shi Muching's gaze was like a steel knife that scraped across Ning Shu's face with a bone-chilling coldness. Ning Shu took the empty bowl into the kitchen and washed it. The bowl was dipped in hormone supplements. Shi Muching's gaze had been fixed on Ning Shu, somewhat certain and somewhat suspicious. Ning Shu wiped the water in the bowl and put it in a cupboard. Ignoring Shi Muching's gaze, he picked up his bag and prepared to leave. Shi Muching reached out and grabbed Ning Shu. Ning Shu turned his head and looked at Shi Muqing indifferently. "Brother, what's the matter? Did you do it?" Shi Muqing said in a low voice. When he spoke, there was a scorching breath, and Ning Shu could feel the heat in his face. Shi Muqing's 5 viscera and 6 bowels were very hot. Ning Shu looked at Shi Muqing's hand. There were red circles on his palm and red veins on his palm. This was a sign that the evil wind had entered his body and invaded his kidneys. Ning Shu looked puzzled. "I don't know what you're talking about. What did I do?" Ning Shu looked at him as if he was crazy. Shi Muqing narrowed his eyes and bent his fingers to grab Ning Shu's neck. Ning Shu tilted his head and dodged. He grabbed Shi Muqing's hand and used all his strength to throw Shi Muqing over his shoulder. Shi Muqing fell heavily to the ground. His face was a little green. He turned over and got up, but he was dizzy and supported himself against the wall. Shi Muqing supported himself against the wall with one hand and covered his chest with the other. His heart was beating so fast that it made Shi Muqing dizzy. Shi Muqing couldn't help but shake his head to clear his head. Ning Shu's shoulder throw made Shi Muqing's face turn green, and a faint red mark appeared between his eyebrows. Ning Shu saw that Shi Muqing wasn't in the right state, so he naturally didn't hold back and threw him over his shoulder again. Shi Muqing fell to the ground with a thud and groaned. At this moment, an earth-shattering scream rang out. "Ah, ah!" Shi Sinan stood upstairs and saw her mother, father, and uncle fall to the ground. Just hearing the thud made her feel pain. Shi Sinan hurriedly ran downstairs and stood in front of Ning Shu. She asked, "Mom, why did you fight with uncle again? Why can't we talk things out? Do you have to fight?" Shi Sinan quickly squatted down and helped Shi Muqing up. Ning Shu's expression was quite cold. He took his bag and left. Shi Sinan ignored Ning Shu and asked Shi Muqing anxiously, "Uncle, how are you? Are you okay?" Shi Muqing's nose twitched. When he smelled Shi Sinan's scent, his lower abdomen actually began to stir, and he wanted to press this woman under him. The recent events had made Shi Muqing very tired, but when he was with Shi Sinan, he felt exceptionally comfortable. He was really as happy as a fairy. This woman was full of unparalleled attraction to him. As soon as he saw her, he wanted to press the whole woman under him, rudely tear her apart. Shi Muqing was like a wild beast that had released its bestial nature. He was addicted to this kind of thing and felt that his body was full of strength, waiting to enter the palace. Shi Sinan was still worried about Shi Muqing and checked if there were any injuries on his body. When she looked up, she saw the emergency nurse staring straight at her. That kind of gaze was too obvious. Shi Sinan immediately blushed and turned to leave, but Shi Muqing grabbed her arm and threw her on the sofa. Shi Sinan exclaimed, but when Shi Muqing pressed over, she took the initiative to wrap her arms around his neck. On the sofa in the living room, another fierce battle ended at some point. And Ning Shu drove to the hospital. Of course, she knew what Shi Muqing was talking about. For some evidence, Ning Shu had become a child of wealth. There were always some people who would do desperate things for money. As long as the chips weren't enough, there was nothing that couldn't be betrayed. Chapter 793. Moreover, the employees of Shi Muqing's company did not sell their lives to Shi Muqing. Shi Muqing was rich, but not every employee in his company was rich. Ning Shu was worried sick about the Shi family's company, and Shi Muqing was also in trouble. Otherwise, with Shi Muqing's character, how could he let go of such an opportunity? If he did not come out to cause trouble, he would not be Shi Muqing. However, he was in trouble now, so he did not care about the Shi family's company. When they arrived at the hospital, Ning Shu went to Old Master Shi's ward. Old Master Shi had already woken up, but he was not in good spirits and could not say much. The servant was taking care of Old Master Shi, wiping his face and hands. "Father," Ning Shu called out to the old man. Old Master Shi saw Ning Shu and said weakly, "Is old Zhang really dead?" "He's dead," Ning Shu said. "He died when the rescue failed." The driver admitted that he was paid to kill him. Old Master Shi did not say anything for a while before saying, "Call my lawyer over." Calling a lawyer meant that he was going to make a will. Ning Shu called Old Master Shi's personal business lawyer. Not long after, a lawyer in a suit came over. However, this lawyer was accompanied by an old man who was about Old Master Shi's age. The old man saw Old Master Shi lying on the hospital bed and asked, "Can you survive?" This old man had been Old Master Shi's friend since he was young. He was Old Master Shi's lawyer, and now his position as lawyer was inherited by his son. This old man had a very high status in Old Master Shi's heart. Even Shirlina had to call him Uncle Zhou. "I'm old. I don't know if I can survive. I called you here this time to make a will." Old Master Shi's voice was rather weak. Uncle Zhou's son turned on the computer. Old Master Shi said, "After I pass away, all my assets, including my shares, villas, and real estate, will be given to my daughter." Old Master Shi looked at Ning Shu. "My daughter, Shirlina, will inherit it. Everything I said was said when I was conscious." The lawyer typed on the keyboard and finally printed out the document. He placed it in front of the old man. The old man looked at it word by word and said to Ning Shu, "Take a look." Ning Shu took the document and looked at it carefully. After a while, he said, "No problem, Dad." The old man held a fountain pen and signed it with difficulty. Then, he pressed his thumb on the ink pad and left his fingerprint on the name. "Now, this document has legal effect." The lawyer placed the will on the document and waited for it to be notarized before sealing it with a seal. Ning Shu said, "Father, take good care of yourself. Don't think too much about other things." After the old man was done, he was in low spirits and closed his eyes. Ning Shu's Uncle Zhou said, "Thank you for coming to visit Grandpa." Uncle Zhou asked Ning Shu to hold on. The old man was still here, so there was no need to be afraid. After sending the lawyer away, Ning Shu went to the hospital to register and prepare to collect the eggs. Anyway, the Shi family wouldn't be handed over to Shi Sinan. Ning Shu had already given up on Shi Sinan, so Shi Sinan couldn't inherit anything from the Shi family. He didn't want the Shi family's things to fall into Shi Muqing's hands. After collecting the eggs, he went to the sperm bank to choose high-quality sperm and found a professional surrogate mother. Shirlina's body was already 40 years old. Although she had taken good care of herself, she was already at the advanced age of childbearing, so it wasn't good for the child's development. Besides, Ning Shu still had to work and stabilize the company. There was also Shi Muqing eyeing her covetously. Pregnancy was too much of a burden on her. Shi Muqing might suddenly make a move on her. It was too dangerous. Ning Shu came out of the equipment ward and clutched his stomach. His stomach was a little swollen. It didn't take long to collect the eggs. After collecting the eggs, Ning Shu contacted a professional surrogate mother. The surrogate mother was very young and healthy. After that, Ning Shu went to the sperm bank to choose high-quality sperm. Ning Shu chose the sperm of an elite man. Ning Shu found that the child would not only inherit his parents' DNA, but also their personalities. Shi Sinan's personality was the same as her father's. They were romantic and passionate, and the pursuit of love was engraved in their bones. To be able to become an elite in society, most of them were self-disciplined and had strong self-control. Otherwise, how could they become elites? Once the sperm was selected, it would be fertilized. When the fertilization was successful, it would be implanted into the surrogate mother's body. Ning Shu chose to conceive a boy. It was really too difficult for a girl to inherit the company in the future. No matter what, women were a vulnerable group. This was undeniable. They would always be ostracized and ridiculed in the battlefield of men. To support a company, it was twice as hard as a man. From this moment on, Shirlina's child was in the womb. The surrogate mother had a special company to take care of her. They always paid attention to the surrogate mother's physical condition and gave birth to a healthy and smart child. The surrogate mother spent a lot of money, but it was worth it. Ning Shu would occasionally visit the surrogate mother and inject a little spiritual energy into her body. After taking the egg, Ning Shu felt uncomfortable for a long time. This was the aftereffect of taking the egg. In fact, taking the egg was harmful to a woman's body. Fortunately, the energy of peerless martial arts was slowly repairing his body, so he didn't feel too uncomfortable. Ning Shu spent most of his time in the hospital. The next day, he went to work at the company and basically didn't return to the villa. The villa had become a place for Shimucheng and Shi Sinan to spend their vacation. It was like heaven. Shi Sinan didn't call to ask what was wrong with Grandpa or why Mom didn't come home. She was probably having so much fun with Shimucheng that she had forgotten everything. Sometimes, women would give up their lives for men. They didn't care about their relatives at all. They were so careless that even if their relatives were killed, they could still have a happy ending with their enemies. Ning Shu sneered. Continue to play. The happier you are, the better. Life is short, you have to enjoy it to the fullest. Ning Shu rested in the hospital and took care of old Master Shi. Old Master Shi wasn't in good spirits and basically slept the whole day. During the day, Ning Shu went to work at the company again. He was running between the hospital and the company. As soon as Ning Shu arrived at the company, the secretary said to Ning Shu, "President, the vice president came to the company today." Ning Shu raised his eyebrows. Why wasn't he with Shi Sinan? The vice president has drafted a cooperation proposal. It's a project for HJ Company to develop new energy, the secretary said. Ning Shu just sneered. This HJ Company was Shimucheng's company. Developing new energy was very expensive. It was just a pretext to take money from the company. Now that several of Shimucheng's clubs had been closed for rectification, and a company was also suspected of tax evasion, the situation in Shimucheng was not good. Therefore, the Shi family's company was stupid and had a lot of money. After taking out the money, he even scolded the Shi family in his heart, feeling that the Shi family owed him. Wishful thinking. What did the Shi family's company owe you? Chapter 794. Shimucheng took the Shi family's money for granted and treated others as fools. He didn't even ask if others agreed. Ning Shu's secretary said, "Inform the finance department that Shimucheng's cooperation project is not approved. No funds will be allocated." Shimucheng's project was easily worth tens of millions. He would invest more in the later stages, and there was no profit at all. The secretary acknowledged and turned to call the finance department. Also, all of Shimucheng's cooperation projects are not approved, Ning Shu said lightly. It was not Shimucheng's turn to ride roughshod over the Shi family's territory. Moreover, old Master Shi had already made a will. Everything in the Shi family belonged to her. After dealing with these matters, Ning Shu began to read the documents. With a bang, the office door was violently pushed open. Ning Shu looked up from the documents and saw Shimucheng walking in with a cold face. He threw the folder in front of Ning Shu. Shimucheng looked at Ning Shu coldly and arrogantly. Why is the cooperation project not approved? He went to the finance department to get the money, but was told that the cooperation project was not approved. Ning Shu picked up the folder that Shimucheng had thrown over, flipped it open, took down the document, and tore it into pieces without even looking at it. You dare to take out a useless cooperation case? Shimucheng, is your brain full of shit? Shimucheng looked at Ning Shu coldly. You don't agree, but there are others who agree. Those people on the board of directors have less money now, and now they want to make an example out of you. This cooperation project will have generous returns. They will agree. Ning Shu sneered. To take money from the board of directors was simply asking for their lives. Moreover, this new energy source was simply a joke. The company's stock has been falling recently. We won't do any investment projects. Ning Shu directly rejected Shi Muqing. Shi Muqing narrowed his eyes slightly. It's precisely because the stock has fallen that the company needs new projects to pull up the company's stock. Ning Shu, I said no means no. There's no reason. Ning Shu's face was cold. You can leave now. Shi Muqing narrowed his eyes slightly and changed the topic, asking, how is Dad now? When Shi Muqing called out the word father, his voice was cold. Pretty good, Ning Shu said. What was this guy planning? Shi Muqing turned around and sat on the sofa. He crossed his legs and said, speaking of which, I should go and see the old man. Where is the old man? Are you trying to set your sights on old master now? Dad is fine. You don't have to worry about him. Your surname is Shi, and you're not part of the Shi family. It's not up to you to care about Dad, Ning Shu said coldly. Shi Muqing pointed his finger at his forehead, looked at Ning Shu, and said maliciously, is the old man gone? You're the one who's gone. Your whole family is gone. Ning Shu sneered. When Shi Muqing heard Ning Shu's words, his face was extremely stiff and filled with killing intent. His eyes were bloodshot, and when he looked at people, it made people shudder. I really miss the old man a little. Which hospital is the old man in? I have to go and see him. After all, I'm also the old man's son, Shi Muqing said. Ning Shu sat on the leather chair and crossed his hands. The doctor said that Dad needs to rest and is not suitable for a visit. When Dad is better, I'll naturally tell you. Shi Muqing curled his lips and stood up. He chuckled coldly at Ning Shu and left. Not long after, some shareholders called to ask Ning Shu how old Master Ning Shu was doing. They questioned Ning Shu's decision to keep it a secret. Moreover, it wasn't just one shareholder who called to ask. They even went to Ning Shu's office to question him. They were all trying to find out about the old man's situation. Ning Shu, the secretary, said, now the company has spread the news that the chairman is dead. They said that CEO, you hid the news of his death. The company's shares fell again. Ning Shu, Shi Muqing, that bitch really didn't stop for a moment. Damn it. Those shareholders of the company were only able to secure Shirlina's position as the CEO because of the old man. If something really happened to the old man, these people would immediately be restless and drag Shirlina down. It was somewhat unwilling to let a woman be the company's decision-maker. Shi Muqing started to cause trouble again. With just a few words, he could make the company's people lose their minds. Ning Shu called to report Shi Muqing's energy company. What development of new energy was simply a scam? New energy was simply a gimmick. Right now, energy was nothing more than oil, electricity, water, and wind. In the end, they were all converted into electricity. What kind of energy could you come up with? Why don't you go up to the sky and receive lightning? I'll report you. Even if I can't bring down your company, I'll fucking kill you. Ning Shu called the hospital servant and said, let Dad answer the phone. Lena. The old man's voice was a little weak. Ning Shu explained the company's situation and said to the old man, I'll hold a shareholders meeting later and turn on a video for those shareholders to see. The old man grunted. Ning Shu's secretary said, inform the shareholders of the meeting. At the shareholders meeting, Shi Muqing was also present. He was sitting on a chair, and when he saw Ning Shu, he curled his lips and sneered. Ning Shu couldn't be bothered with this bitch and said directly, now, the chairman wants to say a few words to everyone. Ning Shu connected the video on the computer, and the old man appeared on the big screen. The head of the hospital bed was raised, and the old man was lying on the bed with a serious and dignified expression. During this period of time when I'm recuperating, all the company's matters will be handed over to the CEO, Sherlina. Chairman, how are you feeling? A shareholder asked the old man. This video was recorded in advance. The old man said indifferently, not bad. You're all elders, so support Lena's work. It won't be long before I can be discharged. The shareholders looked at each other and said, Chairman, don't worry. Shi Muqing frowned tightly because he actually saw that servant in the video. Didn't he get someone to deal with that servant? Why did she appear in the old man's ward? Then, did Sherlina and the old man also know about his relationship with Sinan? Since they knew, why didn't they do anything? Shi Muqing looked at Ning Shu. Didn't he care about his daughter at all? Or was this family playing a badger game, and Sinan was the tool? Shi Muqing's face was cold and stiff. His expression was a little irritable, making his face and lips red. There was a straight red mark between his eyebrows. Ning Shu turned off the video and said coldly, now that the company is in crisis, we're all in the same boat, and we'll share the risk. I don't want anyone to do things that harm others without benefiting themselves. Everyone, support my work, and I'll definitely guarantee the interests of everyone here. Chapter 795. After the meeting, Shi Muqing walked up to Ning Shu and asked, where is Old Master? I told you, Old Master is not suitable for visitors right now. Ning Shu said coldly, if you have the time, why don't you investigate HJ Company's background and see if this company is a shell company? Don't make cooperation cases where money is spilled. Shi Muqing's expression was cold. Short-sighted. Women have long hair but short insight. Some cooperation cases don't have profits now, but they have unimaginable returns for the company's future. Ning Shu was speechless. Ning Shu was very convinced that Shi Muqing was talking nonsense with a deadpan expression, pretending to be serious. Ning Shu shrugged and said unscrupulously, I don't want to invest. I'm just short-sighted. I won't pass the cooperation case and I won't pay. What can you do to me? Come and bite me. Jump up and bite me. Shi Muqing's eyes flashed and he said, you said that Old Master is not suitable for visitors right now. Why is that servant in Old Master's ward? Of course she's taking care of Old Master. Ning Shu and Shi Muqing looked at each other. Since when do you care about such a little servant? It's not that I care, but Sinan misses the osmanthus wine balls made by this servant and asked her to come back and make them for my niece. Taking care of Old Master is more important. Sinan won't die if she doesn't eat for a day. Hearing Ning Shu's words, Shi Muqing's eyes were sharp. He sneered and said, Sinan is your daughter, but you don't care about her at all. I wonder if she's your daughter. What does it have to do with you whether she's my daughter or not? Shi Muqing became more and more confused and felt that he had fallen into a trap. Shi Muqing still wanted to say something, but his phone suddenly rang. Shi Muqing glanced coldly at Ning Shu and picked up the phone. As soon as he heard the contents of the phone call, Shi Muqing's face suddenly became gloomy and terrifying. He turned to look at Ning Shu and said coldly to Ning Shu, very good, very good. His energy company was going to be investigated again, and this was done by this woman in front of him. When he said that he wanted to invest in this company, someone immediately reported the company. This company was originally set up by Shi Muqing at the last minute. The purpose was to take money from the Shi family's company. Even if it was taken over, there was no loss to Shi Muqing at all. However, this slap on Shi Muqing's face made the proud and arrogant Shi Muqing feel that his dignity had been trampled on. Shi Muqing's eyes were filled with killing intent. At the same time, he straightened his expression and looked at Ning Shu with vigilance. Ning Shu tilted his head. What are you talking about? I don't understand. Shi Muqing turned around and left the meeting room. He went straight to the company's garage and stepped on the accelerator to return to the villa. Ning Shu smiled as he watched Shi Muqing leave with boundless anger. Speaking of which, she hadn't seen her daughter for a while. She had to go back and see how she was doing. Ning Shu drove back to the Shi family's villa. Shi Muqing's car was parked in front of the villa. Ning Shu walked into the living room and saw Shi Muqing on top of Shi Sinan, one hand strangling Shi Sinan's neck. Shi Muqing's eyes were malicious as he said viciously, "What exactly are you and your family plotting?" Shi Sinan was choked by Shi Muqing until she couldn't breathe. Tears flowed from the corners of her eyes. She had no idea what her uncle was talking about. As soon as her uncle returned, he was strangling her neck viciously. Seeing the suspicion on her uncle's face, Shi Sinan's heart ached as if it was being torn apart. The good times from before were like a dream. Shi Muqing's heart ached when he saw Shi Sinan's ignorant and innocent look. However, when he thought about how she had attracted his attention by leaning on him like this, even if he was so angry that he wanted to strangle her to death now, his body was restless. He wanted this woman to gasp for breath under his body, tear her apart, and possess her. He simply didn't know what to do with her. Shi Muqing's lower abdomen was tense now, and he couldn't help but loosen his grip on Shi Sinan's hand. Shi Sinan instantly exhaled and coughed violently. Seeing that Shi Sinan was breathing, Shi Muqing strangled her neck again, causing Shi Sinan's face to turn red. Shi Sinan's eyes were blank and innocent as she looked at Shi Muqing sadly and didn't resist at all. Ning Shu was speechless. Mental illness. Ning Shu walked over and pushed Shi Muqing away from Shi Sinan. Shi Sinan was breathing heavily. When Shi Sinan saw Ning Shu, she immediately hugged Ning Shu and cried aggrievedly, "Mom." Ning Shu pushed Shi Sinan away and sized her up. He couldn't help but want to laugh in his heart. Shi Sinan had become much plumper, her arms were fatter, and her thighs were thicker. She was wearing loose pajamas now, revealing her calves. Her calves and stomach had also become thicker, making her legs look shorter. Shi Sinan was now twice as thick as before. Her face was slightly swollen and oily. She was no longer the little girl who used to smile sweetly. A fair complexion covered 3 ugliness, a tall complexion covered 5 ugliness, a rich complexion covered 100 ugliness, and a fat complexion ruined everything. Shi Sinan would only get fatter. Ning Shu didn't look at Shi Sinan. He turned to look at Shi Muqing. "Why are you hitting Sinan? Do you want to fight?" Shi Sinan immediately stood in front of Ning Shu. She straightened her neck and said hoarsely to Ning Shu, "Mom, don't fight. Let's talk things out." Ning Shu glared at Shi Sinan and blinked thoughtfully. There were still red marks on Shi Sinan's neck, and her face was still flushed. She had forgotten that Shi Muqing had fiercely strangled her just now. Did she only have 7 seconds of memory? Ning Shu wanted to kneel down and write the word, "convinced." No matter how fierce Shi Muqing was with her, she would reflexively forget. This, Ning Shu didn't know what to say. Thousands of words couldn't express Ning Shu's complicated feelings now. Under the radiance of Holy Mother Shi Sinan, Ning Shu felt a little ashamed of her inferiority. "Mom, let's talk things out." "I don't want you to fight," Shi Sinan said again. Her eyes were pitiful, but coupled with her slightly enlarged face, Ning Shu couldn't bear to look at her directly. She looked like she was saying, "I'm fine, I can hold it in. As long as everyone is fine, it's okay for me to suffer a little." Shi Muqing looked at Shi Sinan with a complicated expression. What a silly girl. The Shi family was full of sinister and cunning people, but this girl was so pure and silly that it made one's heart ache. Shi Muqing's expression kept changing. One moment it was full of murderous intent, and the next moment, it was conflicted and hesitant. Shi Muqing really didn't know what to do with her. Shi Muqing thought of killing her, but his heart ached slightly. Moreover, this woman was very attractive to him. His lower body was swollen and uncomfortable now, and his heart was frantically wanting to press this woman under his body. When he saw her, the self-control he was proud of disappeared. Shi Muqing forced himself not to look at Shi Sinan. He couldn't even stand the smell of Shi Sinan. He felt that his sense of smell was unprecedentedly sharp, just like a male animal smelling a female animal. Chapter 796. Shi Sinan was originally sad that Shi Muqing had suddenly turned hostile. Seeing that Shi Muqing wasn't looking at her, Shi Sinan was even sadder. She felt that life was worse than death. Shi Sinan really wanted to hug Shi Muqing's strong body and tell her uncle not to be angry with her. She was very uncomfortable and in pain. No one in the living room spoke, and the atmosphere was very stagnant. Ning Shu suddenly said, "It's noon now. After lunch, I'll go to the hospital to see your grandfather." Shi Sinan's face was full of pain and she was in a trance. She didn't hear Ning Shu's words at all. Ning Shu asked the servants to prepare lunch, but the dishes served were all oily and fishy. There were big fish and big meat, and Ning Shu even saw braised pork knuckles in soy sauce. Seeing that Ning Shu didn't speak, the servant thought that Ning Shu wasn't satisfied with these dishes. The Shi family's food had always been bland, so she quickly explained, "This is what little miss likes to eat." Ning Shu nodded. "Make 2 vegetarian dishes." Shi Muqing. Ning Shu and Shi Sinan sat at the dining table. Shi Sinan was still in so much pain that she wanted to die, but in the face of a table of dishes, her eyes were focused. Shi Sinan's stomach made a rumbling sound. She was obviously hungry. Shi Sinan didn't feel it before, but now that she was facing a table of dishes, she was so hungry that she couldn't help but want to stuff all the food on the table into her mouth. Shi Sinan couldn't help but swallow her saliva as she stared at the braised pork shoulder. Recently, Shi Sinan didn't know what was wrong with her. How could she eat so much? And her stomach was very hungry. Now that she was full at noon, she was starving before dinner and had to find something to fill her stomach. After dinner, she had to get up in the middle of the night to find something to eat. Shi Sinan suspected that she was with her uncle. She consumed too much energy every day and spent most of the day with him. Seeing Shi Sinan like this, Ning Shu smiled subtly and said, "Go ahead and eat." Shi Sinan quickly picked up the bowl. Seeing that Shi Muqing was only drinking water and not eating, she couldn't help but say, "Uncle, you eat too." Shi Muqing could not help but feel his heart soften when he saw this girl carefully trying to please him. However, he really didn't have any appetite. He hadn't had any appetite for a long time. Every day, his mouth was dry and his tongue was numb. He couldn't taste anything at all. In any case, his mouth was dry. Especially when Ning Shu was still sitting opposite him, Shi Muqing lost his appetite even more. Seeing the little girl looking at him like this, Shi Muqing picked up the bowl and ate very slowly. His movements were elegant and noble. Most of the time, he just kept drinking water. On the other hand, Shi Sinan was wolfing down the food. Her mouth was oily, and her cheeks were bulging. The dishes on the table were finished in no time. The 3 of them had eaten so much, and most of it was eaten by Shi Sinan. It was simply unimaginable. What used to be a little bird's stomach was now a rice bucket. Ning Shu only smiled faintly. "Go upstairs. I have something to talk to you about," Ning Shu said to Shi Sinan. Shi Sinan didn't answer Ning Shu. Instead, she looked at Shi Muqing immediately. Seeing that Shi Muqing didn't speak, Shi Sinan didn't know what her uncle meant. Ning Shu said, "Mom, what's the matter? Let's talk here." "Are you sure?" Ning Shu looked at Shi Sinan. Damn it, did Shi Sinan have to ask for Shi Muqing's opinion before doing anything now? What was the point of raising a daughter for so long? Warming the bed for a man, giving birth to a man's child, and working like a horse for a man. Ning Shu suddenly felt a little tired. It was said that how could a woman be loved if she wasn't stupid and sweet? But if she was like Shi Sinan, Ning Shu would rather die alone. However, it seemed that she was going further and further down the road to dying alone. "Mom, what do you want to talk to me about?" Shi Sinan asked. Ning Shu said faintly, "Nothing, as long as you're happy." Ning Shu took her bag and left. She must be crazy to talk to Shi Sinan endlessly. She originally wanted to give Shi Sinan another injection, but now that she saw Shi Sinan like this, there was no need. If she ate like this, her weight would double in less than 2 months. With the addition of hormone and fattening medicine, Shi Sinan's weight would soar like a rocket. The head cone acupoint was on the stomach meridian. Ning Shu's injection would strengthen Shi Sinan's digestive ability and increase her appetite. The most intuitive manifestation was that people got hungry very easily. Once they were hungry, they would want to eat like crazy. Not long after they were full, they would be hungry again. The body didn't need so much energy, so it could only be stored and formed into fat. The Shi family could still afford to raise a big fat person. She just didn't know if Shi Sinan could face a fat person like herself. Shi Sinan watched Ning Shu leave and looked a little annoyed. She had made her mother angry again. Her relationship with her mother was getting more and more indifferent. Sometimes, Shi Sinan even felt that she wasn't her mother anymore. She was so indifferent, as if she was facing a stranger. She didn't want to make her uncle unhappy, nor did she want to make her mother unhappy, but the two of them were like fire and water. Shi Muching raised his head and drank the water in the quilt. Then, he suddenly pushed Shi Sinan against the wall and lifted Shi Sinan's pajamas. Feeling Shi Muching's strong body and hot body, Shi Sinan's heart thumped. After a while, Shi Muching tortured Shi Sinan particularly fiercely and violently. In the end, when he gritted his teeth to vent, his body was in so much pain that Shi Muching couldn't help but groan. Filth flowed out and stuck to Shi Sinan's leg. Shi Muching looked down and saw that the filth was actually mixed with blood. He didn't know if it was his or Shi Sinan's. Shi Muching felt dizzy and his whole body was drenched in cold sweat. His waist was sore and his breathing was extremely rapid. His eardrums were filled with the sound of his heart beating violently, which had lost its rhythm. Even so, his lower abdomen was still tight and ready to go. He still wanted to be entangled with this woman. Shi Muching felt that he couldn't take it anymore. He propped his arm against the wall. This little vixen was really going to suck him dry. Shi Muching felt uncomfortable down there. He took 2 deep breaths, threw Shi Sinan on the sofa, and pressed her down. The wall was too tiring. Change positions. Because of the company's matters and the setback with Ning Shu, Shi Muching suspected that Shi Sinan was bait deliberately released by the Shi family. But in the face of the confused Shi Sinan, Shi Muching felt a little helpless. Even if he explained it to her, he couldn't explain it clearly. Shi Muching could only suppress it in his heart. If he really found out that Shi Sinan was no different from the rest of the Shi family, he definitely wouldn't show mercy. Shi Muching doubled his torture of Shi Sinan. Shi Sinan frowned in pain under Shi Muching's body and kept shouting in pain, but Shi Muching didn't pay attention to her at all. Shi Sinan felt as if her body was being torn apart. Seeing Shi Muching biting and sucking on her body with bloodshot eyes, Shi Sinan was a little scared and could only bite her lip tightly to endure it. Shi Sinan felt that her lower body was numb and she was sweating all over. This was the first time she felt so painful. Uncle was really too rough. Chapter 797. Shi Sinan felt pain in her body, and so did Shi Muching. There was a tearing pain in that place, but it swelled more and more unbearably, as if it was about to explode. Shi Muching gritted his teeth and endured the pain. When he finally released it, he couldn't help but cry out in pain. Shi Muching frowned tightly as he looked at the filth. It was like yellow pus, and there was a fishy smell mixed with blood. Shi Muching suddenly realized that there was something wrong with his body. Previously, he was still proud of his powerful ability. What was 7 times a night? He could do it once a night. Now, Shimuching realized that he didn't know how to control himself. When he saw Shi Sinan, he couldn't help but torment her, making her pant under him. He didn't know fatigue, and his body seemed to be full of strength. Now, his entire body seemed to have been hollowed out. Shimuching supported himself on the sofa with his arms trembling slightly. Shi Sinan was so tired that she didn't even have the strength to open her eyes. Shimuching's body began to stir again, and he wanted to have a good fight again. Shimuching felt like he was going crazy. He quickly got up, put on his clothes, and left without looking back, as if there was a malicious spirit chasing after him. Shi Sinan couldn't help but be heartbroken when she saw how cold and heartless her uncle was. She covered her private parts with her pajamas and lay motionless on the sofa. Shi Sinan lay on the sofa and cried silently. She looked devastated, as if the whole world had abandoned her. Shimuching left the villa and went to the hospital for a checkup. The doctor said that he had to abstain from sex and recuperate for a while. He prescribed some kidney-nourishing medicine. Shimuching didn't want to return to the Shi family villa anymore. As long as he thought of Shi Sinan, Shimuching's heart trembled and his body became incomparably hot. Even if Shi Sinan wasn't by his side, Shimuching still wanted to stroke himself. Shimuching suspected that Shi Sinan was a vixen who specialized in sucking men's essence. Otherwise, why couldn't he control himself when he saw Shi Sinan and wanted to torture her to death? Shimuching took the kidney-nourishing medicine prescribed by the doctor, but it didn't work. Now that his body was already weak, taking the kidney-nourishing medicine made Shimuching's body hot instead. Now, even if Shimuching went to the toilet, he would leak, but not much, only a little. Although Shimuching didn't return to the Shi family's villa, he would think of Shi Sinan from time to time. It was always Shi Sinan's charming appearance under his body. When Shimuching thought of this, his lower abdomen tightened. There was really no other way. Shimuching could only relax. However, after relaxing, he was always dizzy. His heart felt like it was about to explode. But after the climax came, how could he still care about these things? Shimuching went from being well-fed to being annoyed and regretful to being well-fed to being well-fed to being annoyed and regretful to being well-fed to being well-fed to being annoyed and regretful to being well-fed to being well-fed again to being annoyed and regretful to being well-fed again to being well-fed to being well-fed again to being annoyed and regretful. In such a vicious cycle, as long as the name Shi Sinan appeared in Shimuching's mind, it was enough to make him excited for a day. Whenever he thought of Shi Sinan, his mind would be filled with Shi Sinan's seductive appearance. Therefore, it made no difference whether he was in the villa or not. Shimuching had lost a lot of weight, his eyes were dark, and the growth of his beard had slowed down. In the past, he had to shave every morning, but now, it was fine even if he didn't shave for a few days. This was a sign of insufficient kidney power. Shimuching ran to the hospital. Everyone said that he was overworked and needed to recuperate. Shimuching frowned tightly. He felt very uncomfortable. He was dizzy, as if something was pressing down on him. It was very heavy. When he was free, he would simply collapse from exhaustion after practicing 2 sets of military boxing. His entire body would sweat, and his body would fluctuate between hot and cold. Now, Shimuching's body was very abnormal. Ning Shu found out from the villa's servant that Shimuching hadn't returned to the villa for a while. The servant called to tell Ning Shu that the villa's living expenses were gone. Only Shi Sinan was in the villa. She washed her face with tears all day long. How could she know about money? Shi Sinan cried as she stuffed food into her mouth. She was determined to turn her grief into appetite. The servant also said that Shi Sinan had grown a little fat. Ning Shu instructed the servant to cook whatever Shi Sinan wanted to eat. There was no need to save money. Ning Shu hung up the phone and went to see the surrogate mother. Now that the child was 3 months old, the surrogate mother's belly was slightly bulging, and all aspects of the examination were normal. Ning Shu sent some spiritual energy into the surrogate mother's body to strengthen her body. It was also good for the fetus to be less sick. After seeing the surrogate mother, Ning Shu went to the hospital to see Old Master Li. After a few months of recuperation, Old Master Li could barely get out of bed and take 2 steps. After all, he was old. After suffering such a serious injury, it was difficult for him to return to the past. Seeing Ning Shu, Old Master Li asked, "How's the company?" "Fortunately, the stock price has stabilized. It hasn't fallen or risen again. There's nothing wrong with the company." Ning Shu helped Old Master Li lie on the bed. He held Old Master Li's hand and sent some energy into his body. Old Master Li nodded and asked, "Where's Sinan?" She hadn't come to see him for several months, nor had she called him. Ning Shu said, "I didn't want her to come to see you. I was guarding against Shi Muqing. In the end, a girl is biased. That girl doesn't understand her responsibility as a member of the Shi family." Old Master Li sighed and said, "In the end, she got the wrong idea." Old Master Li was referring to using Shi Sinan to tie down Shi Muqing, but Shi Sinan really didn't have the ability. If this task had been done by Shirlina, who had been in the business world, she might have succeeded. It was just that Shirlina was almost 2 years older than Shi Muqing, so Old Master Li wanted to use his granddaughter. Did Shi Sinan need to understand her responsibility as a member of the Shi family? No, she just needed to wait for the right person. Shirlina was also a woman. She was responsible for the Shi family and the livelihood of the entire company, but when it came to Shi Sinan was like an angel who didn't eat the food of mortals. It was Shirlina and Old Master Li's problem. Shi Sinan should have known her responsibility from a young age. Didn't she have to pay a price to enjoy brocade clothes, delicious food, and servants? Ning Shu talked to Old Master Li for a while, then went to the company without stopping. Shi Muqing hadn't come to work for a while, and the vice president's office was empty. In fact, it didn't make any difference whether Shi Muqing came to the company or not. Ning Shu directly deducted Shi Muqing's salary and didn't let the finance department transfer money to Shi Muqing's card. It had to be known that the salary of a vice president of a company wasn't small. This money could be saved to add a few more office equipment to the office. It was just that he hadn't appeared for such a long time, and Ning Shu felt that Shi Muqing was holding back some big move. Ning Shu felt that he had to be on guard in case something out of control happened. Damn, Shi Muqing's body was really strong. If it were any other man, they wouldn't have been able to bear it. Sure enough, he was favored by the heavens. Chapter 798. Ning Shu had always been on guard against Shi Muqing, but after a long time, Shi Muqing seemed to have evaporated from the face of the earth. Ning Shu called the villa and asked the servants if Shi Muqing had gone back, but he was told that Shi Muqing hadn't returned to the villa. Ning Shu hung up the phone. Where on earth had this guy run off to? Ning Shu simply ended his work and prepared to go back to the villa to take a look. As soon as he walked into the entrance, Ning Shu heard faint sobbing. Ning Shu thought that he had entered a haunted house, and goosebumps instantly rose on his skin. As he walked in, he saw a fat girl sitting on the sofa, eating potato chips and drinking Coke, crying silently. Ning Shu raised his eyebrows. After not seeing her for a while, Shi Sinan had gained a lot of weight. Her facial features were squeezed together, and she had a thick double chin. Her originally slender figure had now become extremely clumsy, and whenever she moved, the flesh on her body wouldn't stop shaking. Ning Shu simply couldn't recognize his daughter. Ning Shu just stood there. Shi Sinan turned to look at Ning Shu, and tears fell down her cheeks. Ning Shu looked away, unable to bear to look at her. If it was the Shi Sinan of the past, such a delicate and pitiful appearance would simply be a pure and lovely lily. But now, Tears flowed down her face like a steamed bun, and before they reached her chin, the tears dried up. Shi Xinan stood up with difficulty, and Ning Shu walked over. With every step she took, the excess flesh on her body trembled. Especially her legs. "Mom!" Shi Xinan cried and shouted. Ning Shu said indifferently, "How did you become like this? Why didn't you go to school when you were well? You just stayed at home and ate." How could Shi Xinan think of going to school? Her uncle had left for a long time and hadn't come back at all, and there was no news at all. She waited for her phone every day, hoping that it would ring, even if it was a text message. There was only her uncle's name in this phone. As long as the phone rang, she would know that it was her uncle calling her. She waited and waited, but her uncle didn't call her. Even when she called, her uncle's line was busy. Shi Xinan was in great pain. Did her uncle really not want her anymore? Shi Xinan didn't know the reason. Every day, whenever she thought of her uncle, she would feel heart-wrenching pain. How could she still go to school? School was not as important as her uncle. She had fallen out of love and her life was dark. As for why she ate like this, she couldn't control herself at all. She always felt very hungry. She had to eat something in her mouth to feel better. Shi Xinan didn't even dare to look in the mirror now. How was she going to face her uncle like this? Shi Xinan hated herself to the core. Why couldn't she control her mouth? Did Shi Muqing call you? Where did he go? Ning Shu asked Shi Xinan. At the mention of Shi Muqing, Shi Xinan cried even harder. She sobbed, tears and snot flowing down her face, but she didn't say a word. Seeing her like this, Ning Shu couldn't be bothered to ask her. Shi Xinan just didn't know anything. She just needed to wait for someone to dote on her. Under a man's wings, she could be happy for the rest of her life. Shi Xinan looked at Ning Shu pitifully with her eyes that had already been squeezed into slits. "Mom, what should I do? What should I do?" She couldn't go out at all like this. She would be despised by her uncle. "Eat less and run more," Ning Shu said very insincerely. Shi Xinan's tears flowed even faster. Ning Shu turned and left. Shi Xinan was stunned and in disbelief. Her mother left just like that. She left so casually. How could her mother be so indifferent? She was already in so much pain. Shi Xinan's feelings were extremely complicated now. Ning Shu didn't care at all about how much pain Shi Xinan was in. No matter how much pain she was in, Ning Shu wouldn't feel the same way. Ning Shu had just left the villa when he received a call from a helper in the hospital. On the phone, the helper said anxiously, "Old Master is missing. I just went to get some food, and Old Master disappeared." Ning Shu's expression was cold. "Dad is missing? I just went to get some food, when did he disappear?" Ning Shu asked. "Just a while, about 10 minutes later. I came back with the food, and Old Master was gone," the helper said very fearfully. Ning Shu frowned tightly and hurriedly drove to the police station to call the police as soon as possible. Upon hearing this news, Ning Shu's first thought was that this was definitely Shi Muqing's doing. She had already sealed off Old Master's situation, and even the hospital didn't record Old Master's name in the hospital system. How could Shi Muqing still find Old Master? Ning Shu thought about it and felt that she still gave herself away on the video. At that time, Old Master was wearing a hospital gown with the hospital logo on the hospital gown. At that time, the video was less than 2 minutes long, so she didn't notice. Ning Shu slapped her forehead. After all her calculations, she didn't expect to be negligent in such a detail. She should have transferred Old Master to another hospital immediately. Ning Shu shook her head. She still lacked something. Her brain wasn't working. If she didn't have some tricks up her sleeve, she really wouldn't be able to win against others in a contest of brains. At that time, Shi Muqing must have done it on purpose. He must have deliberately spread the word in the company that Old Master was dead. If Old Master wasn't dead, Shi Mucheng could have found out where Old Master was based on the situation in the ward during the video. Anyway, Old Master who appeared in the video was full of clues that could lead Shi Mucheng to the hospital where Old Master was. Ning Shu went to the police station and said that her father had been kidnapped in the hospital. However, Old Master's disappearance was too sudden. Ning Shu didn't have any clues at all. Even if she called the police now, the kidnappers didn't call, so the police couldn't take action. If Shi Mucheng really kidnapped Old Master, she was afraid that it wasn't just for money. He might even take Old Master's life. After all, Shi Mucheng hated the Shi family so much. Ning Shu returned to the hospital. The servant sat on the sofa with a terrified expression. When she saw Ning Shu, she quickly apologized. "Miss, I really just went to get food. When I came back, he was gone." Ning Shu frowned. "Wasn't it the nurse who delivered the food? Old Master said that he's tired of eating those dishes. He asked me to see if there are any other dishes," the servant immediately said. Ning Shu glanced at the servant and turned to look at the bed. The quilt and sheets on the bed were a little messy, which meant that Old Master had struggled before he was taken away. Ning Shu quickly pulled up the hospital surveillance video. In the video, the servant took the thermos out of the ward. Not long after, a person in a nurse's uniform walked towards the ward. He was wearing a mask. His hair was a little long, and his bangs almost covered his eyes. He couldn't see this person's face at all. This person had a medium build and was wearing a nurse's uniform. Ning Shu still felt that he was a man. Anyway, there was always an indescribable awkwardness. However, this shouldn't be Shi Mucheng. Shi Mucheng's figure was tall and strong. He couldn't fit in the largest nurse's uniform. Chapter 799. Besides, given Shi Mucheng's arrogant personality, how could he possibly wear a nurse's uniform? However, even if this person pretending to be a nurse wasn't Shi Mucheng, he was related to him. The person in the nurse's uniform walked into the ward. After a while, the man pushed the wheelchair out. The old man in the wheelchair had his head tilted to one side and his body was motionless. He had obviously lost consciousness. Ning Shu looked at the surveillance footage and sighed heavily. Ning Shu had no clue where to find the old man now. The old man's body could barely walk 2 steps now, so the chances of him escaping were not high. The fact that he didn't directly take the old man's life meant that he still had some ulterior motives. Shi Mucheng was really capable. Ning Shu rubbed his forehead. In the end, he had been careless. If he hadn't taken care of everything, he could have lost a life. Ning Shu sent the video to the police station to prove that his father had really been kidnapped. However, Ning Shu saw the license plate number of the car on the surveillance footage at the entrance of the hospital. The image was a little blurry, and he could only roughly make out the shape of the number. After getting this number, Ning Shu immediately went to check on the owner of the car. Then, he went to the traffic department to check on the car's whereabouts. Just as Ning Shu was dizzy from all the work, his phone rang. Ning Shu saw that the caller ID was his home number. Ning Shu picked up the phone, and Shi Sinan's nasal voice came from the other end. "Mom," Ning Shu raised his eyebrows. Shi Sinan rarely took the initiative to call him. Now that she suddenly called, something must have happened. "Mom, I feel so bad." "Mom, where are you now?" Shi Sinan sobbed as she spoke. She was alone in the living room of the villa. It was dark outside, and the servants were in their own rooms. They wouldn't come to the living room. Shi Sinan curled up on the sofa alone and summoned the courage to call Ning Shu. Now, Shi Sinan felt as if she had been abandoned by the world. She felt so lonely and scared. The night breeze blew against the French windows. It was cold and scary. Ning Shu was so busy that he didn't have time to comfort his lonely daughter. He said directly, "Your grandfather is missing. I'm busy looking for him now." "How could this be?" Shi Xinan's voice was unusually shocked. Ning Shu looked at the road surveillance footage of the traffic department and saw the direction the car was heading in. He had a vague idea of what was going on. There was a villa in Shimucheng. Regardless of whether the old man was in that villa or not, Ning Shu had to go there. "Mom, why did Grandpa go missing?" Shi Xinan suddenly remembered that she hadn't seen her grandfather for a long time. Ning Shu quickly said, "I'm going to work." Then, he hung up the phone. As Shi Xinan listened to the busy tone on the phone, tears streamed down her face, and her stomach rumbled. As Shi Xinan cried, she picked up the snacks on the table and ate them, swallowing them along with her tears. Ning Shu took off his office suit and changed into clothes that were easy to move around in. He put on a pair of flats with large rubberized soles, took a rope, a flashlight, a knife, and a weapon, a long stick, and prepared to go to the villa in Shimucheng. It was almost midnight now, and there weren't many cars on the road. Ning Shu stepped on the accelerator all the way to his destination. The living room of the villa was lit up, but it was dark upstairs. Ning Shu approached the living room window, which was tightly covered by the curtains. Ning Shu couldn't see what was going on inside. He only heard people talking inside, and it seemed that there were quite a few people. Ning Shu clung to the wall. It was very likely that the old man was in this villa, but there were many rooms in the villa. Which room was the old man in? Before figuring out the situation, he couldn't act rashly. What if he tried to kill the old man? Besides, he didn't know how many people were inside. Ning Shu wasn't sure if he could beat these people. Ning Shu raised her head and saw the air conditioner box. She carefully climbed up the tree beside the villa, mobilized her Qi Jin, and jumped onto the air conditioner box. Then, she used the air conditioner box to reach the balcony of the room on the second floor. Ning Shu walked into the room and turned on the flashlight to check the situation. There was no one in the bedroom. Hearing footsteps in the corridor outside, Ning Shu hurriedly turned off the flashlight. When the footsteps disappeared, Ning Shu slowly and gently opened the door. The noise in the living room could be heard upstairs. The smell of smoke and alcohol assailed his nose. There were indeed a lot of people. Fortunately, he hadn't rushed in directly earlier. Otherwise, he would have been chopped into minced meat by each of them. Ning Shu slipped into the room next door, which was still dark. Ning Shu turned on the flashlight, but there was still no sign of the old man. Where was the old man? Ning Shu didn't see him in this room. He went to another room, but this room was brightly lit. Ning Shu immediately took out the fruit knife tied to his leg to defend himself. The old man was tied to a thick wooden chair. The old man's face was pale. Ning Shu hurriedly walked over and whispered, "Dad." The old man opened his eyes slightly. When he saw Ning Shu, he was stunned. "Why are you here?" Ning Shu cut the rope with the knife and whispered to the old man, "Let's not talk about this first. I'll carry you on my back and escape first. There are a lot of them. Lena, Dad is old. It's worth living for so long. You." The old man still wanted to say something, but Ning Shu carried him on his back and touched his wound. It was very painful. Ning Shu used the rope to tie himself and the old man together. He used his free hands to tie the remaining rope to the bed leg. He pulled the rope and slowly slid down from the window. The rope rubbed against his hands, and it was burning. Moreover, it was the weight of two people. His palms hurt. He guessed that the skin had been scraped. It wasn't easy to get down. Ning Shu stuck to the wall and carried the old man to the parking lot. He released the old man and put him in the car. Then, he quickly drove away. After the car drove for a while, Ning Shu heaved a sigh of relief. He was lucky to have successfully saved the old man. No, It should be sure Lena's tireless investigation of Shimu City that let Ning Shu know that there was a villa in Shimu City there. Ning Shu took out his phone to call the police. From the rearview mirror, he saw a few cars speeding toward him. Did they find that the old man was missing? Ning Shu's face was serious. He stepped hard on the gas and went straight to the police station. Come and fucking chase me, come and chase me. The cars behind him were very fast. Some people even stuck their heads out of the window. Ning Shu shouted for him to stop. Ning Shu ignored him. He pursed his lips tightly and stepped on the gas pedal. Ning Shu called the police. A police car came from Ning Shu's direction. It bumped into Ning Shu head-on. The car that was chasing Ning Shu immediately turned around and drove away. At this time, Ning Shu was really relieved. He turned around and saw that the old man had fainted. Chapter 800. After relaxing, Ning Shu felt that his entire body was sore and limp. His hands were trembling, and the steering wheel was sticky and wet. Ning Shu opened his hands, and his palms were badly mutilated. Ning Shu gritted his teeth and drove to the hospital, but he didn't go to the previous company. Even a nurse who came out of nowhere could enter the ward. When they arrived at the hospital, a nurse pushed the old man to the operating room. The nurse treated the abrasions on Ning Shu's hands and wrapped them with gauze. Ning Shu slumped on the chair outside the operating room, waiting for the operation to end. Ning Shu waited and waited. He was so tired that he closed his eyes and fell asleep. It was the nurse who woke Ning Shu up. "How's my father?" Ning Shu asked. "His life isn't in danger. He's been transferred to the intensive care unit," the nurse said. Ning Shu nodded and found a bed to sleep. He was very tired. After Ning Shu woke up, he went to the ward to see the old man. The old man had already woken up. When he saw Ning Shu, his gaze was particularly complicated. "Dad, why did they capture you?" Ning Shu asked. The old man said weakly, "You probably can't imagine why they captured me. They want me to write a will and donate all my family assets and company to a charity organization." Ning Shu was speechless. "Did you write it, Dad?" The corners of the old man's mouth moved slightly. "I did. I'm old and can't take the torture. Writing it will give me a quick death. Anyway, I've already made a will before. It's notarized by the law. The will they want is useless. I don't plan on coming back alive." Ning Shu was speechless. "Did you see Shimucheng? That villa belongs to Shimucheng." "Shimucheng must have done this," Ning Shu asked. "No, I didn't see him. He didn't appear from the beginning to the end," the old man said. Shimucheng was so cautious. Ning Shu turned on his tablet and looked up the charity that his grandfather had mentioned. He only found 1 or 2 pieces of information online, but none of them were useful. It was probably newly established again. Shimucheng liked to play this kind of game the most. "If I don't want to stay in the hospital, I'll go home. I'll see what he can do to me," the old man said. "If 10 security guards aren't enough, then 20 or 30. Ning Shu nodded and went through the discharge procedures for the old man. He hired a better doctor to follow him to the villa. Ning Shu went to the security company and found 20 security guards to guard around the villa. The old man sat in his wheelchair and entered the living room. Seeing that the living room was empty, he couldn't help but ask, "Where are the others?" Servants are not allowed to enter the living room, except when serving the dishes. Ning Shu said lightly. "Why?" the old man asked. Ning Shu smiled. "Dad, you don't want to know the reason. This was because there were many places in the villa where Shimucheng and Sinan played." The old man returned to his room and lay down on the bed. Ning Shu opened the door to Sinan's room and walked in. Sinan was still sleeping. Her huge body was lying on the bed, making the bed seem small. She had probably gained weight. She was snoring when she slept, and saliva was dripping from the corner of her mouth. Sinan had gained weight again. Ning Shu pushed Sinan, but she didn't wake up. She turned over, and the bed creaked. Get up, Ning Shu shouted. Sinan opened her eyes. When she saw Ning Shu, she sat up with difficulty. Ning Shu shouted, Mom. Your grandfather is back. Go and see him, Ning Shu said to Sinan. Sinan got up from the bed and went to the old man's room. Ning Shu followed her into the room and heard the old man's shocked voice. Who are you? Grandpa, I'm Sinan, Sinan said sadly. The old man was speechless for a long time. Why are you like this? Grandpa, do you know where Uncle went? Sinan asked the old man with tears in her eyes. The old man's face suddenly turned ugly, and he said indifferently, I've been in the hospital all this time. How would I know where your healthy uncle went? Sinan's expression looked very painful. Her face was twisted and ugly. The old man sighed and said, Grandpa is tired. You can go out. Grandpa, you really don't know where Uncle went? Sinan asked unwillingly. Why did no one know where Uncle went? Uncle left without saying goodbye. Didn't he know how sad and scared she would be? Let Grandpa rest, Ning Shu said. Your uncle will be back soon. Really? Sinan immediately widened her eyes and looked at Ning Shu. Ning Shu nodded. In this case, Shimuching might come back to check on the situation. Sinan's face lightened up a little, and her eyes were filled with anticipation. Ning Shu just watched silently. In Sinan's life, there was nothing else except love. Ning Shu felt that she would never be able to understand this kind of passionate love without regrets. She was usually a normal person, but when it came to love, it was as if she had lost her mind. The people at the police station informed Ning Shu to go over and make a statement. They said that they had caught 2 suspects. There were so many people, but only 2 were caught. The suspects who kidnapped the old man also confessed that they wanted the old man to write a will and donate all the family assets to this charity. The police investigated this charity. It was an underground gang organization, and the charity had targeted the old man as soon as it was established. In their words, the old man had no heirs and only had a daughter and granddaughter, so it was not surprising that he would donate his assets. This charity did not belong to Shimuching, and that villa did not belong to Shimuching. Shimuching had transferred it to someone else. That was to say, this matter had nothing to do with Shimuching at all. Shimuching had cleared himself completely. Fuck, this matter was not done by Shimuching. She was going to eat shit. Kidnapping and extortion was a felony. Those who were caught would be sentenced, and those who ran away would be wanted. In any case, they would have to live a life of hiding. But where did Shimuching go? He had planned this series of things, but he did not show up. Ning Shu wondered what Shimuching was up to next. Ning Shu was talking about Shimuching when Shimuching appeared and was stopped outside the villa by the security guards. When Sinan heard that Shimuching was back, she immediately ran downstairs with heavy footsteps to the door to see him. Ning Shu and the old man were sitting in the living room waiting for Shimuching. When Shimuching walked in, he looked at Sinan in shock. Especially when he heard Sinan call him uncle and look at him with her eyes wide open and affectionate, Shimuching swallowed a mouthful of saliva. It was just that after leaving for a while, why did it feel like the world was different? This damn fatty in front of him was definitely not the pure and beautiful Sinan. There was no trace of Sinan in him at all. No, definitely not. You're tuning into the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.